Right now on Ana Cabrera Reports, it is the biggest day on the primary calendar from Vermont to Texas to California. Voters across the country heading to the polls on this Super Tuesday. Donald Trump enters today with delegate dominance, but can he deliver a decisive sweep and get ever closer to that magic number? Or will Nikki Haley pull off the seemingly impossible and turn a last stand into real momentum to remain in the race? Good morning. Thanks for being here. It is 10 o'clock Eastern. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York, and welcome to the most consequential day so far in the race for the presidential nomination. It is Super Tuesday, the single biggest day on the primary calendar. The polls are open or about to be in 16 states across the country, and our team is in 13 of them. By the end of the day today, Donald Trump could be much closer to that magic number, unless Nikki Haley can defy delegate math and political gravity.
At some point, maybe we should say the reason that America keeps losing is because of Donald Trump.
Haley, she's not a problem. I think she's very negative for the party, but she's not a problem in terms of winning because we're winning by a lot.
NBC's Von Hilliard is following the Trump campaign from Florida. Ali Vitale is in Nikki Haley's home state on the road there in South Carolina. And our Steve Kornacki is at the big board for us. So, Von, what is the message coming out of Trump's camp today?
Well, first, Anna, the fact that I'm standing here in Florida and Ali is in South Carolina, the home states of both of these individuals, is telling about the state of this race. There's no last-minute effort to turn out the vote in any of these 16 states. And for Donald Trump and his camp, you played that soundbite from him last night. That was with a Trump-loyal TV outlet that had that extended conversation with him in which he called on Nikki Haley to get out of this race so that Republicans could unify and put their focus on the Democrats and Joe Biden in November. And just this morning, he phoned into Fox and Friends and communicated the same message, repeatedly demurring when asked if he was brokering or trying to broker any sort of a peace deal with Nikki Haley to step aside. But Donald Trump has not held back any punches, continually calling her bird brain, questioning why she ever ran in the first place against him. But for Donald Trump and his team, they've insisted that they want to focus their financial resources towards November. And the other element of this is that the RNC is convening in Houston just 48 hours from now to most likely vote on the next chair and co-chair, who would be his hand-picked selections, including his own daughter-in-law. So for this week, regardless of whether Nikki Haley continues after today or not, Donald Trump and his team insist that they are looking beyond her in the Republican primary, noting his big win in North Dakota last night and the fact that they expect to have wins in every single one of these 16 states here today to send a loud and clear signal that this Republican race is locked up for them.
Ali, there are 865 Republican delegates up for grabs today. The math, though, doesn't look good for Nikki Haley. What do we know about how she's looking at this?
Yeah, the delegate math, Anna, has never quite mathed for Nikki Haley, and that's certainly something that I've asked the candidate and the campaign about over the course of this entire campaign. Nevertheless, they say they're going to keep going for as long as they're competitive. Yes, I'm aware that's a very vague metric, but when you talk to voters, especially Haley supporters, that's really all they want. They want to continue to have an alternative. Haley, of course, willing to give them that at least until Super Tuesday. But listen to what she said this morning, also over on Fox, because after all, it is a Republican primary, and she's trying to turn out those base voters as well. Listen to what she says her thinking is, at least right now. Watch.
This is not personal. This is about the fact that we have to win. We can want to change the country all day long, but if we can't win an election, we can't do any of that. Right. And, I know he's in denial about the fact that we win general elections. This is just about winning elections. This is about getting our country back.
And look, we have said it once, I will say it again. For Nikki Haley, the electability argument in a general election has always been a central selling point for her. And it's frankly one that I hear echoed back from Haley voters as well. It's probably something Donald Trump is going to have to contend with if and likely when he wins this nomination. The fact that a lot of these Haley voters may not come back into the fold for him. But for Haley to make a general election argument and actually be able to play in one, you have to get through a primary. And to begin where we start, to end where we started, the delegate math doesn't work out for her, even on a day like Super Tuesday, where they do see states that could be fertile ground for her. But because of the rules of how delegates are allotted, whether it's winner take all or having to meet certain percentage thresholds, the polling shows that it is a really steep climb for Haley, who will likely reassess after this point as she watches results here in her home state of South Carolina today.
Ali Vitale and Von Hilliard sending you both an extra boost today. I know it's going to be a long one. Thank you so much. Steve, let's just take a step back for a moment. Look at the map. Walk us through the national landscape today.
Yeah, let's take a look here. So you see on the left, this is the current delegate count on the Republican side, 276 for Trump. The magic number, 1,215. Now, yellow here, these are the states voting today. And I just pick right up on what Ali was saying there, that even in places that you look at the demographics of these places and you look at the demographics of the places where Haley's done well so far, even in those places on the map today, in a lot of them, the rules, the procedures are aligned against Haley. There is no better illustration of that than California. California, obviously the biggest state in the country, the biggest delegate haul of any of these states today will be in California. 169 delegates up for grabs. Two things about how they do it in California. Number one, it is a closed primary. And those are very, very bad words if you're Nikki Haley's campaign, because she's gotten so much support from independents and even from Democrats where they've been allowed to participate. They are not allowed to participate in California. Secondly, the rules in California, a simple majority. If you get 50% plus one, you get all 169 delegates. So with no independents, no Democrats for Haley to draw on, that puts Trump at a tremendous advantage with a pretty minimal threshold there, 50% plus one to take all 169. Again, you go to the second biggest prize today. It's Texas. The rules are a little bit different there. But in Texas, of course, relative to California, you're talking about a much more conservative electorate. You're talking about demographics in Texas, in most of the state, that are very favorable to Donald Trump, unfavorable to Nikki Haley. So again, Trump, they give out delegates winner take all. There's an at-large pool for the statewide vote, and then they do them by congressional district. Win the district, get 3 delegates in the district. And again, just based on the demographic patterns we've seen in the results so far and what Texas looks like, no reason to think Trump is not going to get a very, very large share of that 161. Basically meaning that just between California and Texas, Trump could get somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 delegates, maybe even more, just from those 2 states. And you add that to his total, you look at the magic number, he takes a big jump in that direction. You could look at Oklahoma, you could look at Arkansas, you could look at Alabama, maybe even Tennessee, opportunities for Trump to win all of the delegates there as well and really climb up. A few places on this map that Haley could make a stand tonight. I'd look at Vermont. I'd look at Virginia, especially northern Virginia, outside Washington, D.C., and maybe take a look at Minnesota and Colorado. But even if she's performing in those places, the delegate math I just walked through will still leave her far, far behind Donald Trump unless she pulls a major rabbit out of the hat today.
Okay, Steve Kornacki, thank you for laying it all out for us. Let's bring in Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, and Alencia Johnson, Biden-Harris 2020 senior campaign advisor. Great to have you both with us. Mark, tell me what you're watching for today and what states could be interesting.
Well, there's not going to be much drama this week. Effectively, what's happening is that the general election starts this week. Trump will wrap up close to enough delegates to be the nominee, and then Biden will have a State of the Union address. So welcome to the rerun that nobody asked for and nobody really wants to watch. But the reality is that that's going to be the only channel we're going to get for the next 7 months.
Alencia, Haley just won in D.C. on Sunday. Some of these states, as we were just discussing, have open primaries, meaning you don't have to be a registered Republican to vote in that primary. Could that lead to some surprises?
I think it could lead to some surprises whether or not Nikki Haley gets, 30 and 40% of the vote, and particularly some of the states that have an open primary, like my state of Virginia. But I do think she's going to continue to actually be a thorn in Donald Trump's side. Look, I believe what Mark is saying. We are barreling towards the general election this week. Donald Trump will be a lot closer to clinching the Republican nomination. But if Nikki Haley provides a surprise for us, we could see her continuing on until next week, which I think the Republican Party would have to kind of grapple with, where like the lead-in was talking to about how Nikki Haley primary voters, what are they going to do in the general election? Not all of them are going to be sold on Donald Trump, and we'll have to see if the Republican Party pays attention to the ways that they need to in order to bring them in.
So Mark, Haley said, at least she has been saying, she would be in this race until at least Super Tuesday. But the question is, what's next for her? She still has money. She just announced a campaign leadership team in Louisiana. That primary isn't until March 23rd. Do you do that if you're considering dropping out after Super Tuesday?
Sure. Listen, I think win, lose, or draw, it's really good, not only for the country, but it's good for her to keep running. She has really represented herself well, I think, and that wing of the Republican Party that doesn't feel represented. It gives a voice to a lot of people who feel like they're homeless right now in the Republican Party. So I think, and she's communicating a message a lot of people want to hear. 43% of America are independents now. Only 27% identify with either party. So she's a voice for a lot of people out there. And the interesting thing is about her future, you think about, does she have a future in the Trump Republican Party? I mean, if she ran as an independent in this environment against Biden and Trump, she'd get a lot of votes.
That's interesting to think about. And of course, there have been a lot of questions about whether she would run with no labels or some other third party ticket. She's just dismissed those suggestions or those questions. Alencia, obviously, for President Biden, he really isn't facing a significant challenge on his path to secure the Democratic nomination. But there is this vote uncommitted movement among voters who are unhappy with his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Specifically, we saw it in Michigan, over 100,000 voting uncommitted. Usually it's about a fifth of that in that state. Take a listen to what the president of Cal Berkeley Democrats said about how this issue may affect their support for President Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to President Biden, if he wants students and young people to be part of his winning coalition in November, he needs to change. We aren't single-issue voters. We care about our health care. We care about making sure that we have affordable housing. But really, it's hard for us to understand the administration's position when it comes to just supporting the ethnic cleansing in Gaza.
Alencia, do you expect to see more of that protest vote today?
I do actually expect to see more of that protest vote, but what these young people and the people who are galvanizing around the uncommitted votes are saying is that they understand the primary process, right? Understanding that they are able to send a message to the White House and the President Biden's campaign about the issues that they care about. Yes, what is happening to the Palestinian people, but as this young college student said, there are other issues like housing and student debt. And this also gives the president information for the State of the Union to talk about some of these issues, to talk about the things that his administration would love to achieve, but Congress or the conservative judiciary won't allow for him to do. So I think it's actually helpful to give Democrats the case to be made between now and the convention and the general election. Because the other thing that we're not talking about is that a lot of these uncommitted voters are clearly saying, they're not willing to vote for Donald Trump. They don't see him as the answer. They're using this as an opportunity to directly tell the White House and the re-election campaign what it is that they need to see more of. And so you also see the president and Vice President Harris embracing it a bit and talking a bit more about some of these issues, particularly around what's happening with Palestine in the last week.
Well, we, the voters, and these two campaigns, three campaigns, technically, still all going for it. We'll have a lot more information by this time tomorrow, I have a feeling. Alencia Johnson and Mark McKinnon, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here today. Much more ahead this morning, including the electoral fallout from the Supreme Court ruling over Trump's place on the ballot. Also, the GOP frontrunners latest eyebrow-raising rhetoric surrounding migrants and the fictional serial killer he's comparing them to. Plus, the stakes of Super Tuesday. Are we watching the final hours of Nikki Haley's campaign? It's going to be a political brawl at the ballot box no matter what.
What made you switch from Trump to Nikki Haley?
The man is a lunatic. The stronger voice, which might be a little quieter, is Nikki Haley. It's the voice of reason, not the voice of treason.
A woman's not going to be a good president.
So you never even considered her?
No.
Mainly because she's a woman?
Because she's female.
We are back with more of our Super Tuesday coverage. NBC News has reporters fired up all across the country. Right now, we'll talk to two of them in two critical states, Virginia and North Carolina. And NBC's Gary Grumbach is in Glen Allen, Virginia. Shaquille Brewster is in Greensboro, North Carolina. Gary, you're there in the Richmond area. What are you hearing from voters there, and how is it different maybe than the D.C. suburbs?
So when we're talking about the suburbs of some of the big cities in Virginia, we're talking about Richmond, Charlottesville, of course, Washington, D.C. That's where most of the Democratic voters live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And many of them that we've talked to today are saying they just want a return to normal. We're hearing that from Nikki Haley voters. We're hearing that from Democratic voters. And from Trump supporters, we're hearing that the issues that matter to them are the border. It's the economy. It's the kitchen table issues that we hear time and time again after elections. I want to have you listen to one conversation I had with a supporter of Donald Trump just a minute ago. What issues mattered most to you as you were filling out your ballot there?
Honesty, which Mr. Trump has it. He is straightforward, honest, and he speaks his mind. And that's what we like it. And he can put the country first.
Now, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley have both found Virginia to be an important place to be in the weekend before Super Tuesday. They both held rallies in different parts of the state. But when you're talking about the get out the vote effort, neither campaign is really doing all that much as it relates to big surrogates coming in. Glenn Youngkin, who had a massive get out the vote effort in 2023, it was non-existent here. Secure Our Vote was non-existent for either candidate. Glenn Youngkin has said he will not endorse until the general election.
Okay, and so, Shaq, you're in North Carolina, meantime, another key battleground state. It's also got a big gubernatorial race this year. How does that factor into what's happening there?
Hi there. Well, look, it drives turnout. It gets people to come out to the polls for other races that are down the ballot. You mentioned that gubernatorial race. It's expected to be in November, one of the most competitive races for governor in the country. So the primaries that are taking place today, you have both Republican and Democratic voters wanting to have their say on who's going to be in that matchup once we get to November. And then you go further down the ballot, you have 5 open congressional seats based on the new maps that were passed by the legislature here. So competitive races down the ballot. But based on the conversations I've been having with voters both today and yesterday, it's still clear that a lot of focus is at the top of that ballot in the presidential race. And, you know, we talk about the support that Nikki Haley has been able to get away from Donald Trump. But when you dig into it a little bit and you ask even Nikki Haley voters about what they plan to do when you go to November, you hear answers that vary a little bit. I want you to listen to one conversation with a voter who went and cast an early ballot for Nikki Haley. What made you switch from Trump to Nikki Haley?
The man is a lunatic, and I think he's terrible for the country.
What are you thinking about when you say that?
Just that he lies, he cheats, he's bankrupted millions of businesses and people, and I don't see anything good about him.
Let me ask, if Donald Trump is the nominee in November, do you support Joe Biden over Donald Trump?
No.
So despite her vote for Haley, despite her calling Donald Trump a lunatic, she says that she could see herself supporting him in November. I've heard voters tell me the exact opposite, that they voted for Haley and that they can't go to Trump no matter what. But it gives you a sample of, as we watch those votes come in tonight, just because you see voters going away from Donald Trump in some of these states doesn't mean that all of them won't go back to him or stay away from him once we get to November, Anna.
Well, of course, it's just a sampling, but good to hear from those voters to get a sense of what's on their mind as they're going to the polls or turning in those ballots. Gary Grumbach and Shaquille Brewster, thank you both for bringing us your reporting. Up next on Ana Cabrera Reports, the ripple effects of the Supreme Court decision ruling Colorado and other states cannot remove Trump from the ballot, and what voters think about that.
I don't think that the court should decide who the president is. I think the people should vote.
I disagree. I think that he's an insurrectionist. And, you know, on the one hand, you've got people saying, oh, well, states' rights, states' rights. And then the states say, well, hey, we don't want him on our ballot because he's an insurrectionist. And then they say, well, no, we're going to strike that down.
Welcome back. Donald Trump walks into this Super Tuesday with his name on all respective ballots and a legal win under his belt after the Supreme Court ruled states could not remove him from the ballot for violating the 14th Amendment. And this morning, there's fresh fallout from that decision. New concern it could dampen the ability of lawmakers to rein in insurrectionist candidates, potentially setting significant limitations that reach beyond the states to Congress. And joining us with more on this, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Great to have you both here. So, Lisa, some interpretations of this decision suggest even Congress has a narrow path when it comes to enforcing the 14th Amendment. So just how restricting is this ruling when it comes to keeping insurrectionists out of office?
I think that remains to be seen, Anna, and one of the concerns is that the Supreme Court, even though they say only Congress can implement Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, is imprecise in how they're supposed to do that. They say that they can only enact remedial legislation and that they're supposed to do so narrowly. But the concern is that we could be back before the court with respect to later efforts to disqualify either particular candidates or categories of candidates. For example, people who have been convicted of crimes related to January 6th. Is that narrow enough for this court? We don't know yet.
So help me understand, though, if they're saying, yes, Congress has the power to do this, how is Congress's hands tied?
Well, I think the question is, how narrowly does such remedial legislation need to be drawn?
What does that remedial legislation mean?
Well, that's part of the question.
Yeah.
Like, if you have somebody who is an insurrectionist, need they be found guilty in a criminal court to have remedial legislation? Does that remedial legislation need to be very, very specific as to a particular person, or can they enact remedial legislation with respect to categories of people, as I just posed, people who have been convicted of certain crimes related to their participation in January 6th? And we just don't know how narrowly the court will cut that. There are concerns that we will be in cycles of litigation for years to come to the extent that Congress chooses to enforce its powers under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment now.
Trump has been praising this Supreme Court decision. Yesterday it seemed he was expressing confidence about how the high court might handle his presidential immunity argument that's to come. Listen.
So we had a great day with the Supreme Court. That was a great win for America. I was really very proud of it. And now, hopefully, on immunity, which is a big one coming up, because you can't take the power away from the president.
Renato, did the justices give any clues on the immunity question?
They did give one clue in the question presented to the Supreme Court. So there were a number of arguments that were made by Trump. Some of them, as I think has been discussed on this network and in this program before, have been fairly absurd, right? These sort of very wide-ranging immunity arguments that Trump could do anything and not be prosecuted for it. And the Supreme Court took up a narrow issue, whether and to what extent there is immunity for acts that are alleged to be official acts that were undertaken during the course of the presidency. And I think that's important because it sort of hints at the fact that the Supreme Court might split the baby, so to speak, and have a ruling where you end up having a small, narrow presidential immunity that does not cover what Trump did, but nonetheless provides a reason to not only have an oral argument and a decision, which we know is coming, but potentially a remand to Judge Chutkan that runs some time off the clock, in which she has to make a finding that the actions by Trump that are alleged in the indictment fall outside that very narrow presidential immunity.
So I want to turn now to Trump's Georgia election interference case, because new developments there. One of the co-defendants of Trump's is seeking to enter new testimony where he claims that he would reveal a witness lied about the timeline of DA Fani Willis's relationship with her special prosecutor, Nathan Wade. Lisa, do you expect the judge will allow new testimony on this issue? And just how long could this drag out?
I don't think so, particularly given how many new pieces of evidence folks want to introduce here on both sides. The state, for example, wants to introduce testimony from a winery employee who recalls Willis and Wade visiting and Willis paying in cash. The submission yesterday is from a friend of Terrence Bradley's who recalls him telling her when the relationship began, but also overhearing him on the phone with Fani Willis. I think we've reached a place of sort of preposterousness now that the evidence has closed, with everybody trying to get something in under the wire before McAfee rules, with the exception of the cell phone records, which I think he might be inclined to take a look at. I don't really see him opening up the evidence wide to hear from all of these extraneous figures and what has become a really sordid drama, Anna.
And it continues to delay, again, proceedings in that particular case. The one that seems to be on fast track is what's happening in New York. Trump's criminal trial for the hush money payments set to get underway in just a couple of weeks now. Trump's team, though, is now claiming Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg is treating two witnesses who've admitted to lying under oath in the past, Michael Cohen and Alan Weisselberg, differently. The Trump team saying Cohen's getting better treatment because he's willing to turn on Trump. Renata, what's your read on this? Is this prosecutorial misconduct, as Trump's team claims, or is this just to be expected leverage? Is how it works?
I think it's neither. I actually think it's a spin by Trump's team. I think partly they're hoping to get us talking about it like we are right now. I think partly it's to just throw some shade on the prosecutor. I mean, ultimately, the prosecution is going to put on its witnesses on the stand. They're going to be cross-examined. And it's not unusual for prosecutors to put cooperators on the stand who have issues. Often they're convicted of crime. Often they're convicted of crimes like fraud and dishonesty, like Michael Cohen is. And so ultimately, the jury will have to weigh his credibility. That's not all that unusual. But of course, by making a big showing of it, it creates discussion. It probably creates, talking points or fodder for disinformation, and it also, furthers the narrative.
Well, thank you for setting it all straight for us. As somebody who has experience with these cases, Renato Mariotti and Lisa Rubin, good to have you both here. Thank you. Next on Ana Cabrera Reports, down ballot drama in Alabama, how the state Supreme Court's recent ruling impacting IVF access is shaking up Super Tuesday in that state. Plus, the conundrum facing Americans who don't want to vote for Trump or President Biden in November. Could Nikki Haley sway voters' minds?
What if she drops out? Would you be disappointed if she endorsed Trump?
I don't really think she will. I think she'll just keep.
If she does, I'll vote Democrat.
No.
That's all there is to it.
Welcome back. We cannot overstate just how enormous the implications are today for the state of the 2024 presidential race, because if the math does not go Nikki Haley's way at the end of the night, the nation may be on the one-way track to a Trump-Biden rematch. Haley would have to outright win a number of states to remain a viable candidate, because the rules of several Super Tuesday states look much like South Carolina's. Either you win or you take home just a shoddy consolation prize of maybe a few delegates. Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Brendan Buck, former press secretary to House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, and Juanita Tolliver, host of Crooked Media's What a Day podcast. Juanita, if Nikki Haley can't pull off this surprise today, do you think there's an appetite for a Nikki Haley third-party candidacy?
Oh, I sure hope not, for the sake of Democrats and their political plans for 2024. But I do think that she has a solid base of support who wants to see her stay in as long as she can. I know you mentioned the numbers before, and if Trump doesn't hit that 1,200 plus delegate count after today, then I could see her staying in until the donors dry up and the money runs out, which she seems to have more of. I do think, of course, she'd have to face the music later this month. And at that point, her voters and supporters would have to choose. They absolutely probably are not going to Donald Trump, because the reason they like Haley is because she is calling out Trump, because she is naming how much he has cost the Republican voters in terms of election wins and policy ideas, but also because they just don't want to. I think after a poll conducted by the Associated Press after South Carolina, 6 out of 10 Haley supporters said they would absolutely not support Trump in a general election, and that has got to feel good for Biden campaign to hear that type of number.
We have been hearing passion at her events, people cheering loudly or booing, depending on what she's saying. And she's raking in millions of dollars still in donations, 1 million, she said, just in these first few days of March. Brendan, our colleague, Ali Vitale, asked some Haley supporters what they think should happen if Haley doesn't deliver. And here's what they responded with.
Should she stay in even if he sweeps?
Absolutely. It ain't over till it's over.
What happens in 2024 if it's Trump versus Biden? Well, are we on camera?
Biden, probably.
For you. What about the people who say Texas is Trump country and the polls that say it too?
It is.
Brendan, Haley's gone directly after Trump, questioning his competency, his character. Regardless of today's outcome, does that have lasting implications on this race?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big question is what happens after she drops out. I mean, I think anybody looking at this recognizes Nikki Haley is not going to win. Whether she drops out tonight or she drops out a month from now, she's not even articulated a path to victory. The question is, does she try to lead a movement away from Donald Trump within the party? I don't think she's going to be a third party, but does she try to still play spoiler for Donald Trump in some way? That is dangerous territory for her and her political future. The smart thing to do if you're a Republican right now is to just go along to get along, get with the team, endorse Donald Trump, and just kind of go along with it until he's gone. It's not looking like she's like that type of person at this point. She, as you said, she is going hard after him here at the end. She does not seem like someone who's looking for an easy exit ramp. Now, wouldn't surprise me, her being a politician, that she does, what's in her own political interest and ends up endorsing him in the end. But this could be such a close election that if she does lead a movement to say Donald Trump is too big of a danger to the country to be in the White House once again, I think it could have a real impact at the margins that we're talking about.
Juanita, President Biden seems to be banking that more Republicans are upset about Trump's character and derisive comments. Biden recently sat down with a reporter for The New Yorker and, quote, at one point, he pulled out a white note card inscribed with some of Trump's most alarming comments, his threat to terminate the Constitution, his casual talk of being a dictator on day one, his description of immigrants as poisoning the blood of our country. Biden tossed the list on his desk and gave a look of disbelief. What the hell, he said. And Biden can now add Trump's latest remarks to that list, comparing migrants to Silence of the Lambs-style cannibalists. You don't make this stuff up. What do you make of Biden's strategy, Juanita, to focus on this?
I think it definitely creates the choice election that Biden and Democrats want to have in 2024. I do think that highlighting all of these things from Trump, as well as you discussed in the last segment, all of the criminal charges he's facing as well, is a pathway for Democrats. I do caution that, though, because it can't only be that, right? Like, the choice election is very real. But, of course, Biden has to also address concerns within the Democratic base of voters, which we've seen as of late, especially in Michigan, with the bombardment of Gaza and protections for civilians in Gaza. And so I think he's going to have to do both of those on top of setting a vision for 2024 in order to be successful. But my only other concern with banking on calling Trump out repeatedly is that the voters have developed a degree of tolerance and rebounding when Trump makes these outlandish statements, whether it's attacking migrants, whether it's attacking women and abortion rights. There seems to be an ability among the electorate to brush it off. And that absolutely has to be concerning for Democrats as they try to craft this into the choice election that it is.
President Biden is heading into Thursday night's State of the Union with strong economic indicators at his back and a DNC war chest that's more than double the size of Republicans right now. NBC has also learned about a fundraiser just in a few weeks featuring 3 presidents, Biden, Obama, and Clinton, expecting to raise more than $10 million. Brendan, how critical is the money game going to be?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump has put himself behind the 8 ball here with all of his legal costs. But I imagine by the end of the day, he's going to have the resources that he needs. The problem for Joe Biden, as Juanita very articulately just put, he's really unpopular right now. He's got a lot of work to do on both ends. He's got to convince his own voters that he is worthy of a second term, in that he followed through on his promises. They made a lot of promises the first time around, and there are a lot of people who feel like he just didn't get a lot done. But ultimately, I think this election is going to turn on whether Joe Biden can make this more about Donald Trump than about himself. I count me skeptical that Joe Biden is going to make himself popular in the next 8 months. But we know that Donald Trump can really animate people, can really turn people out. And that desensitization that Juanita was talking about is very real. We turn the other way when he does crazy things. And it is the key challenge for Democrats right now is, can you elevate the crazy stuff, the chaos that comes with Donald Trump, and remind people how palpable that was January 6th, for example? Can you make that an emotional issue where people feel like they just have to come out to save democracy? And if they can't do that, Donald Trump is probably going to be president again.
Well, I don't think it's fair to present it as if Trump is much more popular than President Biden. They both are facing headwinds when it comes to that favorability and popularity, with a lot of voters who don't feel good about either of these candidates right now. Brendan Buck and Juanita Tolliver, appreciate the conversation. Thanks for joining us. Alabama voters are among those who are heading to the polls today. And while former President Trump is expected to dominate in the GOP primary, there has been some last-minute drama injected into down-ballot and judges' races over the recent state Supreme Court ruling that caused mass confusion and uncertainty over IVF treatments. And since that's top of mind for voters, state lawmakers are also scrambling this morning to pass new legislation protecting IVF care. NBC's Dasha Burns joins us from a polling place in Montgomery. Dasha, how is this IVF controversy impacting voters?
Well, Anna, there is so much going on in Alabama right now. One of the races that people are casting their ballots on today is to replace that Chief Supreme Court Justice that ruled in this the Alabama case, saying that embryos are children. He's the one that referenced the Bible in his opinion, and that's one of the things that folks are voting on today. And so it is top of mind. But I will tell you, this is Alabama. There is a reason why this case happened the way it happened in this state. This is the deep religious South. And so as I'm talking to voters here, there is a split. There are a lot of folks I've talked to who are in favor of what the state Supreme Court did here. And there are others that are in favor but still want IVF to be protected, and then others that are very unhappy with this decision. So take a listen to just some of the conversations we've had.
I'm a Catholic, and so my views on IVF are not the same as probably the general population. I see all life is valuable, so from embryonic state on, I see it as value, and probably I see it as children's.
The Supreme Court got it wrong, though.
You believe the Supreme Court, the embryo decision? Why do you think they got it wrong?
Because they said embryos are humans. Well, how in the world can you freeze humans? You can't freeze me and me come back. I'm a human.
Anna, there's also a disconnect for a lot of voters where they will say, you know, they agree with the Supreme Court decision. They believe life begins at conception. They think embryos are children. At the same time, they'll say, yeah, but of course people should have access to IVF, and aren't necessarily connecting the dots between those two. So the advocates that are pushing for whether it be legislation or a constitutional amendment to enshrine access to IVF and other fertility treatments, they need to really try to make that connection. And just later today, the state legislature will be trying to solve this issue through legislation, trying to protect clinics so that they can reopen and start those procedures again, Anna.
Okay. Thanks for setting the scene there in Alabama. We'll be watching what happens there later today. Thanks. Up next on Ana Cabrera Reports, another U.S. airdrop of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We are in the region as efforts intensify to reach a ceasefire. Just in, the Pentagon conducted its second airdrop of aid into Gaza this morning, delivering more than 36,000 ready-to-eat meals. And this comes as a top political rival of Israel's prime minister, war cabinet member Benny Gantz, holds a second day of meetings in Washington today. He's also set to meet with Defense Secretary Austin at the Pentagon after sitting down yesterday with Vice President Harris, who pushed for a ceasefire. And as a senior Hamas official tells NBC News, they've presented a counter-proposal, and it is now up to the U.S. to pressure Israel to agree to a ceasefire deal. Let's get the very latest from NBC's Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv for us. Raf, we have new reporting on this ceasefire negotiations. What can you tell us?
So, Anna, these ceasefire talks in Cairo are looking stalled at this point. Israel is saying the ball is in Hamas's court. Hamas needs to provide a list of the surviving hostages. And as you just heard, Hamas is saying Israel needs to respond to what is a new counter-proposal it has put forward. All of this is a long way of saying it appears increasingly unlikely that a deal will be in place in time for the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which begins on Sunday.
This morning, time is running out to get a ceasefire deal before the start of Ramadan.
We're in a window of time right now where we can actually get a hostage deal done.
The U.S. putting new and urgent pressure on both Israel and Hamas.
We need to get more aid in. We need to get the hostages out.
As fears for those hostages grow following a chilling new UN report that found clear and convincing proof that some had been raped while in captivity.
We saw a catalogue of the most extreme and inhumane forms of torture and other horrors.
The UN says there's also evidence Hamas fighters committed rape during the October 7th attack at least 3 locations, including the Supernova Music Festival. Hamas denying the UN's findings, calling them false accusations. Under a proposed deal for a 6-week ceasefire, Hamas would release around 40 hostages, many of them women, in exchange for around 400 Palestinian prisoners. The deal would also bring more aid into Gaza, where famine is tightening its grip. The U.S. planning additional aid drops from military aircraft, but humanitarian groups say it's nowhere near enough to fend off starvation. This view from a Jordanian aid plane shows the staggering devastation in Gaza City after 5 months of Israeli bombing. Somewhere down below, Samia Al-Masri is praying for a ceasefire as she feeds her children with pancakes made out of barley meant for animals. Sometimes I add a bit of sugar, she says. A mom doing what little she can to spare her children the bitterness of war.
And 2 Israeli officials tell me the military here is drawing up plans for a new border crossing to get aid in directly into northern Gaza, where that famine is starting to spread. They say that new crossing would be near Be'eri. It's one of the kibbutzim that was attacked by Hamas on October 7th. No plans finalized yet, but this coming under intense American pressure on Israel to get more aid in. Anna.
And seeing those children's faces is just heartbreaking. Raf Sanchez, thanks. After days of relentless snow in the Sierra Nevadas, measuring upwards of 10 feet, enough to reach the roof of some buildings, folks in California are now expecting another storm. That's next. You're watching Ana Cabrera Reports. Stay right there. The snow is so high right now in parts of Nevada and California that, listen to this, at one ski resort, workers had to tunnel their way to the front desk. And if you want to get to the marketing office entrance at Sugar Bowl Resort, this photo posted to X makes it clear, well, you can't. A multi-day blizzard, dumping snow for 72 relentless hours. And now there is more snow on the way. NBC's Steve Patterson is in Truckee, California, just north of Lake Tahoe. Steve, we see the piles of snow behind you. Have they dug out yet? And what are they awaiting?
They have dug out. We're technically in that second storm system now, so thankfully, mostly it will hit the mountains, up to 1 to 2 feet or so. The rest, if you go lower in elevation, where I am in Truckee and places like South Lake Tahoe, you're looking at just a few inches. They've dug out enough to where they can handle it, but still, there are 10 feet piles of snow in certain communities, so any little bit of dusting on top of that could cause a big headache.
This morning, the race is on to dig out vehicles and homes from a weekend blizzard before snow from a new storm starts piling up again.
We had grass coming up in our yard on Thursday, and now our windows are all buried on our house, so.
This is the aftermath of an intense multi-day storm that unleashed a life-threatening assault on the Mountain West, dumping 5 to 10 feet of snow across the region.
It was full on. Like, it was definitely some pretty intense periods of whiteout conditions.
The region's major thoroughfare, Interstate 80, finally reopening after disrupting traffic and commerce for days.
It has been a real mess.
If you live in it, then you're used to it. But if you're not, I would just say don't come up here if you don't have to.
Because of heavy snow and winds that reached 190 miles per hour at the highest peaks, officials and locals still urging caution on the roads.
We've just been taking it slow, going 25, 30 miles an hour.
The storm effectively ending the season's snow drought, bringing California's snowpack level up to 104% of normal, up from just 32% at the start of this calendar year. Lake Tahoe's famous ski resorts opening back up carefully, with conditions still sketchy up top and deep powder everywhere.
Today we're going to go ski some mellow tree lines and hopefully avoid the avalanches.
And look, most of the bad stuff is now moving south, where it will turn into rain in Southern California. Thankfully, that means a lot of people are going to start coming here to enjoy the snow. With officials, though, they do have a warning, which is watch out for avalanches. There is still serious danger, especially in the backcountry. If you're coming here, you better know what you're doing. Anna?
And I guess the silver lining for those shovelers is those ripped biceps everybody's going to have as they head into the spring. Steve Patterson, appreciate it. Thanks. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow, same time, same place, as always. But we'll have special coverage of tonight's Super Tuesday results. And don't forget, you can always catch our show online around the clock on YouTube and other platforms. For now, I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. Jose Diaz-Balart picks up our coverage right now.
Good morning. It is 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart. It is Super Tuesday, and right now voters are casting their ballots in 16 states and 1 U.S. territory. And while both parties are holding votes in several races, today could mark a decisive moment in the Republican race for the White House. Former President Trump is expected to pick up the lion's share of delegates today, but his sole GOP opponent, Nikki Haley, is looking for an upset. Trump's name will be included on every Republican ballot today, 24 hours after the Supreme Court handed him a legal victory, ruling states cannot bar him from their primary ballots because of his actions on January the 6th. We've got correspondents all over the country today, and we begin with NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki at the big board. Also, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard covering the Trump campaign in West Palm Beach, Florida, and NBC's Ali Vitale joining us from the road in South Carolina covering the Haley campaign. So, Steve, help us break down what we can be expecting today.
Yeah, I think the big picture thing to keep in mind, in yellow here, you see all the states voting on the Republican side. On the left, you see the current delegate count. And, of course, 1215, the magic number to officially win the nomination. And the big thing to keep in mind today is the rules in a lot of these states. They are designed to produce an emphatic and clear winner. And it's no more dramatic than in the biggest state on the board today. That's California. You look at California, think of it as obviously a big, giant blue state in the fall. Demographically, there are a lot of suburbs, big, sprawling suburbs in California. Nikki Haley's done really well in big, sprawling suburbs. So you would say this might be a reasonable target for Haley, but the rules in California. It's a closed primary. Independents can't vote. Democrats can't vote. That's different than we've seen in a lot of the contests so far. Haley's, the backbone of her support really has come from independents and even some Democrats so far, all off limits to her in California. And the rules also in California, simple majority. 50% plus one, and you get all 169 delegates in the state. So in a closed primary, all Trump has to do is clear that simple majority threshold. He'd win all 169 delegates. Go to Texas, the second biggest prize on the board. 161 delegates. It's not quite winner take all officially, but it's effectively winner take almost all of the delegates at least. So between these two states, 169, the lion's share potentially of 161. Trump could get 300 plus delegates tonight just from these two states. If you added that to where he is right now, you see he's starting to take a giant step towards 12-15. You look at some of the other states, the demographics of those states, in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, in Alabama, Tennessee, the demographics here. Trump's base, rural, blue collar, white working class, white voters without a college degree. They predominate in the states I just circled here, especially on the Republican side. And again, the rules in these states, not quite winner take all, but pretty close to it. So you just could see Trump really padding his lead there. Where could Haley make some noise tonight? Couple places to look. The first, Vermont. This was one of Trump's worst states when he first ran in 2016 in the primary. He only got 32% of the vote in Vermont back then. No party registration in Vermont. If you think of yourself as a Democrat, as an independent, you're free to vote in that primary. Also, I'd take a close look at Virginia, and especially the northern part of Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. Huge, huge, huge concentrations there of suburbs with white college-educated voters, and that's been a group that's been very friendly to Haley, relatively speaking, so far. In Virginia, you can collect delegates by congressional district, so even if Haley can't win statewide, she certainly can collect delegates in Virginia. She could be able to do that potentially in Minnesota, could be able to do that potentially in Vermont as well, in Colorado as well. But even if she's doing that, even if she's making noise in these states, what I just showed you in the rules in the other states and the nature demographically of the other states, unless Haley pulls off what would be monumental upsets and outright wins a number of the states that I circled here as Trump's strong spots, she is going to get buried in the delegate math by the end of today.
And so, Ali, how is the Haley campaign feeling about the possibility of burial Super Tuesday?
Look, they are obviously not looking at the burial prospects. Instead, they're focusing on the optimism that they are seeing on the ground, Jose. The fact that they see voters who say that if in a general election it comes down to Trump versus Biden, those voters could go back to Trump. But I've met many voters who say they would go to Biden or they would just as soon stay home. It's that kind of general election calculus that the Haley campaign is hinging the entirety of their campaign on at this point, saying that they're staying in this race through Super Tuesday, in large part because they think that Trump is not electable in a general, especially.
Just lost Ali Vitale, who is on the road, as you can see. So we're going to try to reestablish communication with Ali. But meanwhile, I want to go to Vaughn, because the other side is the Trump side. They were handed a victory by the Supreme Court yesterday. What is the Trump campaign looking at Super Tuesday with?
Right. First, if I may, Jose, to offer Ali some defense, I think she's putting more miles on the car than any actual presidential candidate today on Super Tuesday. So kudos to Ali there for the work, because let's be frank, Donald Trump, he's been hanging out at Mar-a-Lago since he got back to town on Saturday. He had 2 Super Tuesday rallies in North Carolina and Virginia Saturday, but he's been back here at his estate in Palm Beach since. And last night he went on a right-wing outlet in which he took questions and largely focused on taking on Joe Biden, the Democrats, this November. And he phoned in to Fox and Friends this morning, again, where he shoved aside the idea of any sort of striking of a peace deal with Nikki Haley. But I think that the math that Steve outlines is so telling, because I think it's important for Americans to understand that the Trump campaign has largely looked past this primary for months now. Back before Iowans even went to caucus in January, I was down here in West Palm Beach, and the campaign senior advisors, they circled the date of March 19th. They believed that their data showed that they were going to be able to wrap up the nomination with enough delegates to meet that threshold to become presumptive nominees by March 19th. But in fact, they could even hit that date as soon as a week from today, March 12th. But as Steve outlined, they're looking at places like California where they can hit that 50% plus one threshold and take all the delegates home. And if you go back to 8 years ago, Donald Trump, he had to square off against Ted Cruz all the way into May. And it was states that are voting today where Donald Trump lost. That included places like Texas, Arkansas, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Utah. Compare that to where we find ourselves today, and Nikki Haley is barely able to compete, and as Steve outlined, is looking to compete in congressional districts in places like Northern Virginia, anywhere where she can pick up delegates. It's not even a matter of winning states here at this point for her anti-Trump campaign, Jose.
And Vaughn, Trump's campaign and the campaign style includes these rallies where he continues to express all kinds of, for example, just on the issue of immigration and the humanitarian crisis at the border, he's bringing up all of these issues that are geared towards Vaughn whom?
They're geared towards turning out a part of the American electorate that he thinks he can win with. Let's be very clear, Jose. Donald Trump has, at least according to his data, doesn't see any major pushback to the nearly year and a half of campaign rhetoric that he has deployed to date, including, as he said last night, that immigrants poison the blood of America. And when you look at the head-to-head matchups between him and Joe Biden, the Trump campaign likes exactly where they find themselves. They believe that they're going to be able to appeal to enough independent voters who also have concerns over the migrant crisis and have concerns over the way that they view the economy. And then they believe that they're going to be able to turn out even more voters, those kind of Trump-loyal voters that maybe didn't even come out and vote in 2020. And so when you're looking at sort of some of these swing states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona and Georgia, they believe there's an untapped part of that Trump-loyal electorate this go-around, and that it's that type of rhetoric, Donald Trump being Donald Trump, that could very well win him the election, and he doesn't have to go and try to placate the likes of Nikki Haley voters, and he could very well be very well eager to cede them over to Joe Biden or even a potential third-party candidate in November. Donald Trump has shown us how he's run over the last year and a half, and there's no reason to suggest, based off of even of his remarks the last 24 hours, that he's going to change course over the next 9 months, Jose.
And I understand that Ali Vitale on the road again, but we have reestablished communication with her. Ali, so where are you heading? And then the Haley campaign, where is it heading after tomorrow, right? Tonight? I think a lot of it has to do with money and resources.
Both very good questions, Jose, as we are out here basically making the case for why infrastructure is so important and why the investments in rural broadband need to be amplified. But I think where we're going is Charleston, South Carolina, because we're told that that is the area that Nikki Haley is going to be spending her time in today. She's flying back from Texas. I was just in Fort Worth with her last night for, at this point, the final public rally that we think she is going to give. And I say that not because I know what's going to happen with the fate of her campaign after today, but because it's the last public thing on her schedule that the campaign has told us about. We believe that she's going to be taking in the results somewhere in Charleston, likely on Kiowa Island, where she has a residence. But what happens after that is really anybody's guess. I'm glad you brought up the point of resources, because usually that's the thing that would end a campaign. For Haley, she's in a very interesting position in
just that interesting position that we were going to hear from Ali. We lost, but that's because this is live television. She is literally on the road. I want to thank Steve Kornacki, Vaughn Hillard, and Ali Vitale for being with us this morning. We're going to take a short break. When we come back in 60 seconds, we're going to head to one of the states where the Haley campaign is hoping to exceed expectations. Later, we're going to go to California and break down the state's most hotly contested race in decades to replace the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. And in Alabama, the real drama is in the judicial races. Several of the state's Supreme Court justices who just made their controversial IVF ruling are on the ballot. But right now, a quick look at what's on the minds of voters in Utah with our NBC News campaign embed, Alex Tapper.
We're here in Provo, Utah, home to Brigham Young University. The Democrats here in Utah voted by mail. The Republicans are gearing up for caucuses tonight. And we want to talk to young voters about the issues that matter most to them, and also religious voters about how their faith informs their political decisions.
13 past the hour today, Virginia is holding an open primary, which means people can pick what party they want to vote for when they show up at the ballot box. It's also a state where Nikki Haley is hoping to beat expectations. NBC's Gary Grumbach is traveling through Virginia and joins us. Gary, what are you seeing there?
Hey there, Jose. Yeah, we just left Henrico County. We're headed towards Spotsylvania County as we speak. And what we're hearing in Henrico County is a lot of Democratic frustration from voters that either are voting Democratic or want to vote for Democratic, but are so frustrated with the party and the situation as it relates to the issues that matter to them. Here's what one voter I talked to had to say.
What candidate do you think is best suited to deal with the issues that matter to your economy, race relations?
I'm still kind of, I don't know at this point. I just really wish we would focus on the issues and not all of the other stuff. So that's kind of what's blurring it for me. Because up until this point, I feel like we haven't really been focusing on that. I just want to see more action, you know. So that's it for me.
Now, this frustration with the Democratic Party may help Nikki Haley because, as has been mentioned earlier on in the show, the areas of Virginia that Nikki Haley can do best in are going to be the suburbs of Richmond, the suburbs of Washington, D.C., the area around Charlottesville. So that's going to be an area that if she's going to pick up anything in Virginia, it's going to be there. But as we're looking at who is supporting the two candidates, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, on the Republican side, both candidates were in the Commonwealth of Virginia this past weekend. But the Get Out the Vote campaign elsewhere really hasn't existed. In 2023, Virginia, the Republican Party, had a massive statewide get out the vote effort called Secure Your Vote. It was led by Glenn Youngkin, the governor. That is nowhere to be seen these days. And so it'll be interesting to see how much of the Republican Party does get out to vote and who is voting for Nikki Haley. Jose?
Gary Grumbach, thank you so very much. And we've got you covered in even more states on this Super Tuesday. Up next, why the governor's race in North Carolina could make history. But first, let's check in with political campaign embed Sarah Dean, who's got this update from Vermont.
I'm Sarah Dean here in Montpelier, Vermont. Vermont is one of the states Nikki Haley is hoping to do well in today. It has an open primary, meaning anyone can participate. It's similar to neighboring New Hampshire, where she had one of her best showings yet in the early primary states. And besides New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, the only sitting governor to have endorsed Nikki Haley is Vermont's Republican Governor Phil Scott.
Twenty past the hour, we're following breaking news. Meta says Facebook and Instagram users are having trouble accessing those services, and their tools often used by campaigns. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins us. Brian, exactly what's going on?
Yeah, it's not just Facebook and Instagram, by the way. It appears to be other Meta products like Messenger as well. This on the morning of a very important Super Tuesday. But I want to read to you a statement that Facebook has put out just in the last hour. They posted this on X, formerly known as Twitter. Andy Stone, the communications officer there, saying, quote, "We're aware people are having trouble accessing our services. We are working on this now." That's all we have at this time. Anecdotally, Jose, I tried to log into Instagram. It appears that that is down. And interestingly, Facebook, it appears as if a number of people, including myself, have been logged out of the app. So getting back in also appears to have some issues. Down Detector, which is a site that logs reported issues on many websites, including AT&T, which had issues a few weeks ago. Facebook outages reported over 500,000 as of a few minutes ago. So this appears to be a pretty widespread issue. Again, no resolution at this point. We don't know the reason why this is happening or whether or not that resolution will come anytime soon. But again, a major social media platform, multiple platforms, disrupted, it appears, this morning, Jose.
Ron Chung, thank you so very much. And now to North Carolina, where all eyes are on the governor's race, which is already shaping up to make history. NBC Shaquille Brewster joins us from Greensboro, North Carolina. Shaq, good morning. Why is this particular race so critical, and how are voters feeling about it?
Well, Jose, I'll tell you, this is a race that is expected to be one of the most competitive gubernatorial elections once we get to November. Democrats have had control of North Carolina's governor's mansion since 2016. So Republicans see this as an opportunity, especially during a presidential election year, to flip control of the governor's mansion in the state that has gone Republican in the past couple of presidential cycles. So a lot of attention is being focused on that. And today is the primary. So these are the opportunities for both parties to have their say and put up who they believe would be their best candidate to go ahead and take on the opposite party in November. But I'll tell you, based on the conversations I've been having with voters, while that is certainly a focus for many of them, a lot of them are still talking about the top of the ticket and, of course, the presidential primary. You have folks saying that they're backing Nikki Haley, Donald Trump. I've met a couple of people here coming in and supporting Joe Biden, even though it's not a competitive Democratic race. I want you to listen to what voters have told me over the course of this morning.
I think Trump is a special guy at a special time.
Why Nikki Haley?
Two reasons. One, I think she would do a very good job. And two, I think Donald Trump is a threat to the well-being of our country.
Why President Biden?
He is the right man for this time. I couldn't have wished for anyone better in my mind because he has tremendous experience.
And there's overlap in the presidential primary and the governor's race here. Former President Trump just this weekend putting his thumb on the scale a little bit of that primary, backing the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, who has been the front runner in this governor's primary, backing him, giving him his full endorsement there. Robinson is a controversial and outspoken figure here in North Carolina. Some voters I talked to said that they are potentially uncomfortable with him being on the ticket in November, thinking that it could help Democrats in that general election. And then there's also competitive congressional races further down the ballot. Just a sign that it's not just the presidential, it's lots of other races that folks are coming out and voting on here, Jose.
Indeed. Shaquille Brewster, thank you so very much. And voters are also heading to the polls in Texas today. We're keeping a close eye on the primary for the 18th Congressional District. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who's been in office since 1994, has sailed through 15 elections so far, but is facing a serious challenge today. MSNBC's Tremaine Lee has more.
For 30 years, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has represented the 18th Congressional District in Houston, Texas. She's become a household name and a hero for many, fighting for equality, black progress, and reparations.
I introduced this to make Juneteenth a federal holiday.
But this cycle, the Congresswoman is facing the first formidable challenge to her once comfortable seat in the House.
My name is Amanda Edwards.
On the primary ballot this Tuesday, Jackson Lee will be up against former Houston City Councilwoman Amanda Edwards, an upstart who was once Jackson Lee's intern. A recent survey shows a close race.
It's okay to have competition, but I am Sheila, and I'm the Sheila that will deliver.
Redistricting has squeezed out huge swaths of Jackson Lee's political base of traditional black voters. Recent polling shows men, Latino, and independent voters favor Edwards, who has spent months laser-focused on the race.
I think it's ripe for a change election. Everyone in this district wanted change.
Jackson Lee spent much of last year running for mayor of Houston, losing both that race and the time to fundraise for her reelection, as Edwards stacked up a war chest 10 times the amount of Jackson Lee during last quarter.
So here I am in 2024, reminding my constituents that they have not seen me take a misstep from serving them. That's what I like most, for them to know the work we've done and the work we are going to do.
At the same time, a local scandal, undated, secretly recorded audio of the Congresswoman berating her staff, released during her failed run for mayor. She has since apologized, but argues the tapes were recorded illegally and released as part of a plan to undermine her, not by Edwards, but by people she calls MAGA Democrats. Back in 1994, it was Jackson Lee who was the upstart challenging a powerful incumbent, Representative Craig Washington, and winning. and she never looked back.
This 18th congressional district seat belongs to the people of the 18th congressional district. And when they say it's time for change, that's when change will result.
Like all else in Texas, the political implications of this race are huge and perhaps historic.
And our thanks to Tremaine Lee for that report. Up next, we're going to go to California, where some big names are running for seats in the Senate and the House. Plus, Donald Trump ramping up his anti-immigrant rhetoric, this time comparing them to Hannibal Lecter. You're watching our special Super Tuesday coverage on MSNBC. Past the hour, we continue with our Super Tuesday coverage, watching races across the country and looking at what it means for November. Joining us now, Rachel Bitecofer, political strategist and host of The Cycle on Substack. She is also author of Hit 'em Where It Hurts, How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game. Also with us, former Ohio Governor John Kasich and former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro. Both Governor Kasich and Secretary Castro are MSNBC political analysts. So, Rachel, how significant is Super Tuesday for the Republican primaries and for Nikki Haley?
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking or talking about like a normal open primary. I mean, really what we have is two incumbents running, right? It might have been a little bit of separation on time, but Trump is definitely running more as an incumbent. So I think what we're going to see in Super Tuesday is probably the final exclamation point on what has been a pretty uncompetitive primary. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Nikki Haley will go away. I think she might be more likely now that all these cases seem like they're not going to get to trial in time for the election. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Governor Kasich, if Nikki Haley doesn't get any states in Super Tuesday, is there a future for her?
She's not going to win any of these states. It's not going to happen. I mean, a future for her, sure. I mean, in terms of what that means, I mean, does that mean she's going to stay as a candidate? It gets to be really, really, really tough. And then people start to really scratch their heads and say, and I understand she feels strongly. I'm not going to disrespect her because she feels she has to carry on. But, you know, I look at my own situation when I was facing Trump, and it got to the point where he was going to win. There was no way for me to stop him. And at that point, I delivered what I felt all the messages I needed to deliver. And by the way, I never endorsed them. So, you know, maybe there is something for her to say when she's finished with this. My whole concern for her is, instead of a whole attack on Trump, I wish she would articulate a vision for the future that could get Americans excited about the possibilities here in this 21st century. But at this point, we're not seeing that. If she's going to continue, that's what she needs to do. Really tough to continue because you saw the Koch brothers took their money away. It makes it harder for her to continue. But God bless her.
I want to bring in Gotti Schwartz, who is in Burbank, and he's covering the California primary. He's also standing by with Congressman Adam Schiff, who is one of the candidates for the Senate. Gotti.
That's right, Jose. We just saw Adam Schiff, Congressman, vote in the primary. This has been it's not a contentious race, but it is a race with a lot of stakes. We've got two of your colleagues in the House, as well as you vacating your House seats to run for this seat. Can you tell me what differentiates you from Katie Porter and Congresswoman Lee?
Look, I've got two great House colleagues who are also running, but I think the principal distinction is California is looking for really two qualities in their senator. They want someone who can lead in the really big fights, who can protect our democracy no matter what comes. And I've been in the middle of that fight. I'm going to continue to do everything I can to make sure we remain very much a strong democracy. But Californians are also looking for somebody who can deliver. And I have a strong record of delivering mass transit, delivering an early earthquake warning system, bringing millions back for housing to help get folks who are living on the street into shelter, of writing California's Patient Bill of Rights. It's a record of getting things done. I think that sets me apart from my colleagues.
On the ballot today, besides the presidential and besides your race, what was the most important thing to vote for today?
Well, I think the ballot measure we have here in California to help address the acute mental health crisis that we have. So many folks who are without shelter have either substance abuse problems or mental health issues. Predominantly, though, it's an economic issue. We have to build lots and lots more housing, but we also need to make sure that we have the treatment beds and facilities for those who need really acute care. So I think that ballot measure, which a lot of people aren't even aware of, super important.
Prop 1.
Yeah.
That's Prop 1. Now, I've got to ask, one of the biggest talks of the town here in Los Angeles as well as California is the race with Steve Garvey. And a lot of people saying that this is kind of a race of reverse psychology. Your campaign spending quite a bit of money attacking Steve Garvey, saying that it's kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, trying to turn out the Republican vote for Steve Garvey so that you face Steve Garvey in this jungle primary. What's your response to that?
I think people in California understand the jungle primary. It's people outside the state that don't really understand what it's all about. We don't have a closed primary here where Democrats vote for the Democratic candidates and Republicans vote in a separate primary. We're all on the same ballot. There were only 4 of us that qualified to make it on the debate stage, including Steve Garvey. He is on Fox all the time attacking me. I'm distinguishing, as I mentioned, my record from my Democratic colleagues on leadership and effectiveness, but I'm also not shying away from going after Steve Garvey and how he is out of step with California. He'll never protect reproductive freedom. He'll never stand up to the NRA and make sure we have common sense gun safety legislation. He is so far out to the right that he is not what Californians are looking for.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time and good luck today. Thank you. Jose, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you very much, Scotty Schwartz, and please send my regards to the congressman for me. Appreciate it. I want to go back to our conversation, and I want to bring in, Julian Castro on this, because Julian, Trump is doubling down on his anti-immigrant rhetoric as he moves closer to becoming the Republican nominee. The things that he's been saying recently, well, take a listen to some of the things he said just in an interview last night.
They're coming from places unknown, and they're rough people, in many cases from jails, prisons, from mental institutions, insane asylums. Insane asylum, that's Silence of the Lambs stuff. Hannibal Lecter. Anybody know Hannibal Lecter? We don't even have teachers of some of these languages. Who would think that? We have languages that are like from the planet Mars. Nobody knows how to, speak it.
Languages from Mars and immigrants from mental institutions. What is this, do you think, who is this rhetoric geared toward?
Well, I mean, this is hateful, it's hurtful, it's even Hitler-esque rhetoric at times, and it's geared toward a crowd that loves this stuff. And why wouldn't Trump try it again? I mean, this sounds like what he said in 2015 when he came down that escalator, and look what happened in 2016. So he was rewarded politically for this kind of rhetoric. He went on and he did cruel things like family separation, and he thinks that that's a blueprint, that he can win again. I think that the 2020 election showed that when Democrats present a positive alternative, when they object and call out that kind of cruelty, that they win. And so if there's anything I think that's a benefit of Trump winning this primary early, it's that this is going to clarify the race. And the negative partisanship that Rachel, I know, has written brilliantly about, of Democrats rallying around the reality that Trump could well become president again if he's elected, that he is the one on the ballot, that he's promising a national abortion ban, that he's talking about rounding up immigrants, jailing them, the same old cruelty. I think that is the best hope that Democrats have of actually rallying around Joe Biden and winning in November. So it's hateful, cruel rhetoric, but Democrats have to respond to it.
I mean, John,
yeah,
does anybody else have to respond to that too?
First of all, look, I think Julian's trying to make a good point. Look, I don't have, Republican or Democrat talking points. The Biden administration and Democrats were a day late, a dollar short when it comes to the border. This issue has risen, at least temporarily, to the top of the list. I think at the end, people are going to vote on the basis of how they feel about economics. At the same time, I have to say to my evangelical friends, This is not the kind of rhetoric that is expected for us to hear or support. Remember what St. Paul said about compassion and love and kindness and self-control. You got to look and see whether this kind of divisive language serves anybody. It's true we have a problem at the border. It needs to be fixed. The Republicans have just blocked the most important border bill in a long time. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the Democrats were behind on this. Can they make it up? I think maybe they can, but it's really, really tough. And they shouldn't have ignored this. And I think it was part of it because they were afraid of their base. Biden's got a real problem. I mean, he's got a real problem. Everybody knows it. We saw the Siena poll. They're going to have to get their act together. And happy talk is not going to fix their problem.
But there are two different issues, really. And Rachel, I want your thoughts on this, because there is the issue of the humanitarian crisis at the border that has now really become a humanitarian crisis throughout the country. But then there is this specific talk of the people that are, you know, coming from mental institutions and Hannibal Lecter and poisoning the blood of the United States, these languages from Mars. I mean, they're two different things here, Rachel.
I mean, they are, but they're not, right? They're connected. And here's the thing, Julian was just right. It is Hitler-esque speak. It is designed to create a culture of victimization and fear. And here's the thing that I would say. Yes, the rhetoric is awful. Poisoning the blood of Americans, their Hannibal Lecter, that stuff, it's tempting to us to focus on the rhetoric. I think it's much more important to make sure, especially communities of color, hear about the platform. And the Republicans are not sharing that platform, but that is a very, very aggressive anti-immigrant platform where they're talking about mass deportations on day one. And back in 2010, Arizona went through this, Arizona, Alabama, some of the southern states with a show me your papers law. What's coming to the Latino community of America is going to be catastrophic. So I think it's just so much more important to not make it about rhetoric and character and to make it about the tangible threat that those communities are facing. And Julian's just right. It's going to be a long election, and we're going to start to see voters accept that Biden's the nominee, because a lot of the tuned out people still don't get that, and it will come to them, and we're going to see what happens. But I would push very hard back on Governor Kasich, who I admire greatly, because the number one issue in this election is going to be the fact that I am a half citizen now. All the women of America are facing an imminent probability of living under a national abortion ban that will give women in blue states nowhere to hide. So I think it's really about, immigration's a bad issue. Democrats should have acted on it. The asylum process is being abused by these criminal gangs, and it's caused a humanitarian crisis. But what is coming in terms of humanitarian crisis under a Trump dictatorship, because a man who didn't leave office once isn't going to leave the second time, folks, is going to be pretty bad for communities of colors, particularly Latinos and Muslim communities.
Rachel Bidikofer, former Governor John Kasich, Secretary Julian Castro, I thank you so much for being with us this morning. We'll have much more of our special Super Tuesday coverage ahead. But first, we're tracking new developments in the effort to get a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. What a senior Hamas official is telling NBC News this morning. Plus details on an overnight fatal plane crash in Nashville. Stay with us. 47 past the hour. As we keep an eye on the Super Tuesday races, let's get you caught up on some of the day's other headlines. The U.S. Supreme Court has temporarily blocked a new Texas law that allows state and local police to arrest migrants who illegally cross the border from Mexico. The order by Justice Alito freezes a lower court decision that would have allowed the law to take effect on Sunday. The law is now blocked until at least March 13th, giving the justices more time to decide their next steps. The dispute is the latest clash between Texas and the Biden administration over the situation at the southern border. Overnight, traffic cameras caught the moment a small plane crashed near a highway in Nashville, Tennessee, killing all 5 people on board. Police say the pilot reported engine trouble and requested an emergency landing before going down. Jury selection is underway in the involuntary manslaughter trial of James Crumley, the father of the Oxford High School mass shooter. It comes 1 month after his wife, Jennifer Crumley, was convicted of the same charges. In Haiti, officials declared a state of emergency after armed gangs led to massive prison breaks. The gangs actually tried to take over the main international airport on Monday. The AP reports it is unclear if they were successful. And in Israel, the Israeli-Hamas war this morning, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is responding to a senior Hamas official who had said it's now up to the U.S. to pressure Israel to reach a ceasefire agreement before the start of Ramadan. This is Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, for a meeting at the Pentagon earlier this morning. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Jordanian armed forces carried out their second airdrop of humanitarian aid into Gaza, as two Israeli officials say Israel is drawing up plans to open a new border crossing into northern Gaza to deliver more humanitarian aid. Joining us now, NBC's Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. Raf, good seeing you. What did the Secretary of State have to say?
So, Jose, Secretary Blinken was at the State Department. He was hosting the Prime Minister of Qatar, who has been an absolutely key mediator throughout this 5-month crisis. And the Secretary repeated a point we have been hearing from senior administration officials, including the Vice President, over the last couple of days, which is, from the U.S. perspective, they believe there could be a ceasefire immediately if Hamas would only agree to the framework that was hammered out in Paris the other weekend. Take a listen to what the Secretary had to say.
And here, we have an opportunity for an immediate ceasefire that can bring hostages home, that can dramatically increase the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Palestinians who so desperately need it, and can also set the conditions for an enduring resolution. And it is on Hamas to make decisions about whether it is prepared to engage in that ceasefire.
Now, Hamas, not surprisingly, sees this differently. They say the ball is in the Israeli court. They have responded to that framework agreement. We don't know exactly what is in their response, but Jose, these talks seem basically stalled at this point. It is looking increasingly unlikely a deal will be in place by the time Ramadan starts on Sunday. Two Israeli officials are telling me that amid heavy American pressure, they are looking into a plan to open a new border crossing into northern Gaza to get additional humanitarian aid in. Jose.
And Raf, Israel's defense forces released new audio recordings that they say allegedly showing UN employees participating in the October 7th massacre.
Yeah, that's right, Jose. So these are allegedly employees of UNRWA, the troubled UN agency for Palestinian refugees. NBC News has not been able to independently verify these recordings, but the Israeli military says in it you hear teachers from an UNRWA school talking about kidnapping Israeli women on October 7th. These very troubling allegations have led the United States and other countries to withhold funding to UNRWA. UNRWA says it is fired the employees who Israel has brought to its attention, but it is begging the U.S. and other countries to restore that flow of aid, saying they have simply no chance of keeping up the humanitarian operation in Gaza, where famine is now looming, unless that aid is restored. Jose.
Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv for us. Thank you very much. Up next, how the efforts of Alabama's Supreme Court ruling on frozen embryos could impact the ballot box today. But first, let's go to NBC News campaign embed. Nnamdi Igwanwu, who is watching the polls in Nashville, Tennessee. What are you seeing there?
Well, Jose, I got to tell you, it's been a pretty slow but steady stream of voters all day at my polling precinct here in Davidson County. It's one of the few more democratically leaning counties here in Tennessee, which as a state is pretty solidly red and supportive of the former president. But this county specifically, one where Nikki Haley may perhaps be a bit more competitive. So we'll be watching here to see if how many voters after they leave are willing to share if they bought into her argument that she may be the best candidate to defeat current President Joe Biden. We'll be right back with more special election coverage after this break.
57 past the hour. Voters in Alabama are heading to the polls today for Super Tuesday as the state legislature returns with a pivotal agenda. Lawmakers in both chambers still need to vote on an IVF bill after Alabama's Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are considered children. 5 of Alabama's 9 Supreme Court seats are on the ballot today, including the Chief Justice. NBC's Dasha Burns joins us from Montgomery, Alabama. Dasha, good morning. How much is this issue weighing on voters today?
Well, given the importance that we have seen that state Supreme Courts can play, the critical decisions that they can make, it's important. And this is the thing, Jose, we are in Alabama, right? This decision, this Supreme Court ruling on embryos came out of Alabama, which is a deep red religious state. And so a lot of the voters that we've been talking to aren't necessarily disagreeing with the Supreme Court decision. Some do disagree with it. Others agree, but still want access for IVF. And others really do believe embryos are children and they should be protected as such. Take a listen to some of the conversations we had.
The Supreme Court got it wrong, though.
You believe the Supreme Court, the embryo decision? Why do you think they got it wrong?
Because they said embryos are humans. Well, how in the world can you freeze humans? You can't freeze me and me come back. I'm a human.
Do you think people who want to have children should have access to IVF?
Well, I don't know about that because I believe in God. You put them when they want to. If they're supposed to have a baby, let God do the work.
Now, nationally, polls have shown that IVF is overwhelmingly popular, not just with Democrats, but Republicans, even those that identify as evangelicals. But, Jose, the thing that I'm learning from voters as I talk to them here is that the connection isn't necessarily being made between that Supreme Court ruling and putting IVF under threat. And if Democrats are hoping to use reproductive rights as a major issue to rally voters to their side in 2024, they need to make clear how this is an extension of the fall of Roe versus Wade and how a ruling like this can impact fertility care and other reproductive freedoms nationally. Jose?
Dasha Burns in Montgomery, thank you so very much. And that wraps up the hour for me. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart. You can always reach me on social media at JD and you can watch clips from our show at YouTube at msnbc.com/JDB. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Andrew Mitchell picks up with more news right now.
Right now on Super Tuesday, a special edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. In the Republican race, 15 states, 865 delegates, with Donald Trump already holding a commanding lead, and no campaign events scheduled today. Nikki Haley, back home in South Carolina, also not campaigning today, and a big decision pending on whether or not she wants to stay in the race. While at the White House, Joe Biden rolling out some consumer protection initiatives and preparing a State of the Union address for Thursday that he hopes will ignite more enthusiasm on the Democratic base. Good day, everyone. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington, and it is Super Tuesday, the largest single-day voting contest for the Republican nomination. Donald Trump is on the ballot in all 15 GOP races after yesterday's Supreme Court decision, declaring that states cannot bar him from the ballot for allegedly engaging in insurrection on January 6th. 865 Republican delegates are up for grabs today, more than a third of all the Republican delegates. But how they are allocated depends on where you live. The biggest prize, California, with 169 delegates, is winner take all, and it is a closed primary. The majority of today's races also are winner take all, although some require outright majorities to win any delegates. And with Donald Trump favored to win most, if not all, it leaves only a handful within reach for Nikki Haley. After tonight, 47% of the Republican delegates will be allocated, with Mr. Trump expected to clinch the nomination later this month, potentially giving Nikki Haley a reason to stay in the race, perhaps for a few more weeks. We start our coverage with NBC News correspondents across the nation. Vaughn Hilliard at Trump's unofficial Mar-a-Lago headquarters, Ali Vitale following the Haley campaign, Kelly O'Donnell near the White House, Shaquille Brewster in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Priscilla Thompson in Dallas.
I love our team for crunching
Now,
those numbers.
Vaughn, first to you. Mr. Trump is coming off that unanimous Supreme Court victory. So what's his plan for today?
This is the day, Andrea, that Donald Trump once declared that he is the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party. Today is the day that he will not hit the delegate threshold required to walk into the Milwaukee convention to be that presumptive nominee, but he hopes that he is able to sweep all 16 states. That's what his campaign is banking on, and have a delegate haul that sends a clear message to Nikki Haley that this race is over and to step aside. Just this morning, he phoned into Fox News, and he made it clear that the Republican Party should unify and instead focus its resources to beating Joe Biden and the Democrats in November. And all of this is happening the same week, Andrea, that the RNC members are set to meet in Houston just 48 hours from now to most likely select their new chair and co-chair, which is his hand-picked Michael Whatley, a national committee man out of North Carolina, and Lara Trump, his daughter-in-law, to be in that number 2 position. So for Donald Trump, being able to walk today with a clear message that he was able to win in every and each and one of these 16 states would be a defining moment for him atop this Republican Party, and to send a clear message to others to get in line that this Republican primary is all but over, Andrea.
So, Kelly, let's talk to us about Donald Trump heading for a likely 2020 rematch with the president. And as Joe Biden prepares for Thursday's State of the Union, he's facing national polls showing him trailing Mr. Trump.
A challenging time, but also a time of opportunity, according to the Biden campaign, where they view this, Andrea, as the juxtaposition of Super Tuesday and the State of the Union as a moment when many voters who have been busy living their lives and not as tuned in as perhaps your viewers are about the state of the national political scene, that this will be a galvanizing moment when many voters will view this as a clear choice, whether it's the choice they want in terms of the rematch that you indicated or not, a chance for contrast. So the Biden campaign is talking about ways in which the president can use today's vote to solidify his place and then carry that into the State of the Union on Thursday night, where he can talk about policies, ideas, and really the issues that, even if the president is not viewed as popular, based on the polling that you've indicated there, that the ideas, according to the Biden campaign, are quite popular among Democratic voters and independent voters and reachable voters who do not want to see Donald Trump return to office. So it is a week where these 2 major events, today, Super Tuesday, Thursday with the State of the Union, are really anchors in what will be a move toward a general election campaign. And I'm told by advisors on the White House side that they view Thursday night as not just one evening with the biggest audience the president gets all year, but really a rollout of a month of activity to talk about policy ideas, work still to be done, ways to reduce costs for Americans, and setting up that contrast between the Biden era and the influence and the reach of MAGA Republicans. Andrea?
And Ali Vitale, the question everyone is asking, how long will Nikki Haley stay in the race?
And that is the question I think that I'm asking as well as I'm texting my sources. It's also one that Haley, I've posed to her over the course of the last few weeks, and it certainly is not one that she loves to answer, especially because what she often says to me and other reporters is, you're not thinking about dropping out if you are still squarely running the race. I can tell you that just in the last few seconds, a Haley campaign source texted me saying their mood today is that of happy warriors. They're getting out the vote, doing the Haley thing of listening to music. She's, of course, someone who likes to listen to some pump-up music on her election days. That's one of the rituals that this candidate has as people are going to the polls. But make no mistake about it, Andrea, this is also a campaign that is very aware of the landscape that they're operating in. Our team here at NBC also did a bunch of the delegate math, which is great because that means I don't have to. And it bears out the fact that Haley is walking a tightrope in this Super Tuesday contest, one where they're not pointing to states that they think they can win outright. Instead, they're pointing to states where they think they can do well. For example, a state like Virginia that has more open primary rules. I've even heard from people on the ground in Virginia today who say, hey, I'm hearing more than I often do from people who don't play in primaries, from people who are Democrats, but who say that they want to get out to vote for Nikki Haley because they feel, even if it's in this one voter's words, a moot point, it's what they can do in this moment to try to keep Trump off the ballot. Now, those are folks that are probably going to go back to Biden in a general election, and that's going to be a problem for Trump if and when Nikki Haley ultimately departs this race. But look, I've got people saying to me that they think that she could call it a day starting tomorrow or Thursday. But I've also got folks saying to me that she has leadership slates on the ground in places like Georgia and Louisiana. Those contests don't happen, Andrea, until next Tuesday for Georgia and then Saturday after that for Louisiana, which means Nikki Haley could be in it for even longer than just this Super Tuesday.
And, Allie, the president is now speaking, so let's go to President Biden.
No excuses. None.
And how's your relationship with Ned Gaza these days?
Like it's always been.
Sir?
Like it's always been.
Mr. President, what are you preparing for your State of the Union address?
You'll hear me on Thursday. All right? Thank you all so very much.
The president, of course, getting on board Air Force One, heading back to the White House. So, Kelly O'Donnell, let me bring you in here because he just was speaking, I believe, about another delivery this morning of meals ready for eat to Gaza. There's been a big focus on the humanitarian aid, trying to get aid in where Israel, according to the White House, has not been letting nearly enough aid in, the White House and also people in the region. You've got Benny Gantz, a war cabinet member at the State Department today, at the White House yesterday, someone who is in the opposition. And apparently the president just talked about the fact, Kelly, that there are no excuses. They've got to get more aid in.
Exactly. The president coming back from Camp David, where he has spent some extended time dealing with issues and presumably preparing for the State of the Union, having some space and advisors around him to work on that. One of the things we've been seeing from the president is an emphasis on proactive work toward humanitarian aid to address the concerns that have been raised by certainly many in his own party, people around the world. It goes beyond politics to a humanitarian question of what more can be done to provide food and medical services and, life-sustaining help to people in Gaza. And so while the president is also in a public way trying to maintain a solid relationship with Israel by being proactive about the humanitarian piece and insisting that more be done there, he can also address a real-world concern and a political one at the same time. So that's part of what played out there. Yes.
I was just going to say that that's not going over. It's not going over as fixing the problem that he experienced in Michigan with the large uncommitted vote. They tried with the vice president, of course, on Sunday.
Fixing might be an overstatement on my part, but a sense of trying to address that. They are trying to answer what they know is a persistent problem, both, again, on the moral issue and the political one. And certainly voters and the public will decide how he responds to that and if it's satisfactory enough. But that's where there's an emphasis shift, I think, that you're seeing, Andrea.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister from Qatar is at the State Department, was meeting with Secretary Blinken today. He is the prime intermediary with Hamas as they try desperately, as Kelly, you know so well, to try to get a ceasefire decision, some sort of an agreement before next week, before the weekend, which is Ramadan. Back to the campaign, though, here in the U.S. and North Carolina. Shaq Brewster, it's one of the Super Tuesday states that is also a general election swing state, and there's an opening for Nikki Haley to pick up some delegates there. It's not winner take all, but there's also a very hotly contested, very high-profile governor's race with Mark Robinson, a very controversial candidate who has said some truly offensive things.
Yeah, Andrea, definitely a lot to watch here in North Carolina. Starting at the presidential level, yes, while Nikki Haley may not win this fight, you can see that this is a state where she could pick up some delegates if she crosses that 20% threshold. So there's some opportunity for her that she doesn't have in other states where it's a winner-take-all kind of situation. But there's also a lot of attention being focused on what you see down ballot. You mentioned North Carolina in November is expected to have one of the most competitive gubernatorial races in the country, and today is the primary. You see the candidates on the Republican side right there, the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson. He has endorsement of former President Trump. He's outspoken. He's controversial, had to clarify many comments that were considered anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ community, anti-women, going up against Bill Graham and Dale Folwell, who have tried to use that outspoken nature against him. I want you to listen to what one voter told me, one voter who said she voted for Folwell. Listen to how she internalized and interpreted the battle that we're seeing on the Republican side there.
He would probably be fine, but he's sort of like Trump, explosive.
If it's Robinson and Stein in November, I see how thrilled you are about that matchup. What do you do?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know. I'll just have to wait and see.
And if you go further down the ballot, there are open congressional seats that voters are also participating in. A lot of them lean Republican because of the new legislative maps here. A lot that folks are watching here in North Carolina, Andrea.
Thanks to you, Shaq, and Priscilla. Priscilla Thompson, there's a major down-ballot primary in Texas to decide the Democrat who's going to take on Senator Ted Cruz.
That's right, Andrea. You have got 9 Democrats on the ballot today vying for the opportunity to take on Senator Ted Cruz. And if none of those 9 candidates get a majority of the vote today, then this is going to head to a runoff. And so it may not be decided until May. But we did spend the morning with the man who is leading the pack right now, and that is, in terms of fundraising and polls, Congressman Colin Allred. And one of the things I really wanted to talk to him about was the issue of immigration. It is animating the national conversation and certainly an issue to voters here in Texas. And I asked him because State Senator Roland Gutierrez, his closest competitor, has criticized him for taking some votes denouncing Biden's border policies. And I asked Allred about that, and he said that he wanted to send a message that there needs to be more urgency around this issue, that the status quo is not acceptable. And this is absolutely going to be an issue that will continue to animate with the 2 candidates who are likely going to be at the top of the ballot, President Biden and former President Trump. And I will note, I asked Allred if he would campaign with Biden if he came to the state, and Allred told me, quote, "Whoever comes, you will not hear anything different from me." Back to you, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. To Vaughn Hilliard, Ali Vitale, Kelly O'Donnell, Shaq Brewster, and, of course, Priscilla Thompson, covering the nation and the world. Kelly, thank you so much. And the numbers game, Steve Kornacki and Mark Maroney on what they're looking at for tonight. That's next. When we're back in just 60 seconds. Stay with us. You're watching Andrea Mitchell Reports. This is MSNBC. And right now you're looking at a live picture of Montpelier City Hall in the Vermont capital, where hundreds of voters come to cast their ballots on this Super Tuesday. A third of the Republican delegates are up for grabs today in the 15 states holding Republican primaries. Donald Trump holding a majority of the delegates needed to win the Republican nomination over Nikki Haley, who won her first and only contest so far over the weekend in Washington, D.C. Joining us now at the big board is NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, what do you got?
All right, look, you see in yellow here, these are the states that are up for grabs tonight on the Republican side. This is the current delegate count. Trump far ahead of Nikki Haley, and this is the magic number, 1,215, to officially win the Republican nomination. So you take a look at this tonight. Let's take it from Haley's standpoint first. She's far behind. Where could she realistically make a stand tonight? Maybe post some wins? The obvious place to look, the first one, is the state of Vermont. This was one of Donald Trump's worst states in the 2016 primaries. Got only 32% of the vote here back then. It's an open primary. Democrats, Republicans can participate. If Haley wins, it's winner take all, too. So if Haley can win Vermont, 17 delegates. She would get 17 delegates out of Vermont. Where else to look for Haley? Look in Virginia. In Virginia, they give out a lot of delegates by congressional district. And particularly, we will be talking a lot tonight about sort of this area of the state, outside of Washington, D.C. A lot of the congressional districts there have lots of population that is college-educated, suburbanite, higher income. That's been the magic formula for Haley so far to achieve at least a little success where she has Those voters predominate here. She could win some districts in Virginia. Her campaign certainly would love it if they could pull off a statewide victory there. Where else would you look for Haley? Minnesota, they give out the delegates proportionally. She could, especially in the areas around the Twin Cities, get some delegates proportionally in Colorado as well. Some areas there that are also favorable to her. But if that's all she's doing tonight, if those are the bright spots for Nikki Haley, from a delegate standpoint, she's in very, very rough shape, because take a look at the biggest state up for grabs, California, 169 delegates. It is winner take all, and it's a closed primary. No independents. Haley has relied so much on independent support in these early primaries, they can't vote in California. Neither can Democrats, for that matter. That would be winner take all for Trump if he gets it. Texas, with 161, is not quite, but effectively a winner take all state as well. Basically, Haley would have to pull some upsets, some massive upsets in states where demographics and rules are not suited towards her. If she doesn't do that, Donald Trump is poised to have a massive, massive night when it comes to delegates.
The great Steve Kornacki. Thank you, Steve. And let's turn now to NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray, the great Mark Murray.
Hi, Andrea.
Mark, so it's Super Tuesday. It's the day we all love until Election Day, or the big Election Day. So what are you looking for? What do you think Nikki Haley is looking for to stay in the race? She's got some money.
Yeah.
What's her rationale?
Well, see, let's look at her best case scenario. And that is, and Steve did a great job going through the map and the delegates, is that, say she does really well in the Northern Virginia suburbs, for example, where there are a lot of college-educated, moderate, independent voters. She maximizes, wins some congressional districts there. She does well in the proportional math when it comes to North Carolina. She keeps Donald Trump's margins down. Our math from NBC News shows that Nikki Haley's best case scenario, Donald Trump still wins 80% of tonight's 865 delegates. Donald Trump's best night, he ends up getting 90% of the overall delegates. And so that's really the stark math and the reality that Nikki Haley faces right now, that even if she does well, overperforms, Donald Trump is probably going to have a substantial delegate lead as we head into those next contests.
Do you see a scenario if he gets 90 or 90 plus where he goes over the top, or does it really require next week's races?
So going over the top is 1,215 delegates, Andrea. That's the magic number. And no, that's not going to happen tonight. After tonight, we will only get through 47% or less than half of all the delegates. If Donald Trump is able to pass that magic number, we're looking at the middle of this month, March 12th, March 19th. Even if Donald Trump does super, super well tonight, he can't cross that number tonight.
So that's her rationale to stay in. He doesn't have it nailed down yet. He has it all but nailed down. It's a prohibitive lead, but she still has money and she still has a voice. Yet she's down in South Carolina. She doesn't have campaign events today. We're told it's unlikely that we'll see her tonight. So it doesn't sound as though she wants to use the platform that she already has.
Yeah, and she told our colleague Kristen Welker, I'm going to continue to stay into this race, and as long as I'm competitive. Do note, though, that the bar has kind of changed, where right before South Carolina, she said, hey, I want to actually do better than I did in New Hampshire. And Andrea, beyond the delegate math, the reality is that there is probably no state left on the calendar that is more favorable her than her home state of South Carolina and the New Hampshire that we saw last month. And that's just kind of a grim reality. And so she can continue to fight on and to try to remain competitive. But when we look at tonight's results, when we look at the delegate hauls, it might not end up being all that competitive after all.
Mark Murray, thank you. Good luck tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be with you. And today, tens of thousands of Meta users are having issues assessing their Facebook, Threads, and Instagram accounts. NBC News business correspondent Brian Chung joins us now. So, Brian, what do we think is going on here? Is this a total failure? Is it some sort of hack?
Yeah, Andrea. These issues began about 2 hours ago, issues with Meta platforms, including Threads, which is their Twitter competitor, Facebook, and Messenger as well. They said around 10:30 today that, quote, we're aware people are having trouble accessing our services. We are working on this now, but we just got a follow-up in the last few minutes. A spokesperson from Meta saying, quote, earlier today, a technical issue caused people to have difficulty accessing some of our services. We resolved the issue as quickly as possible for everyone who was impacted, and we apologize for any inconvenience. opinions anecdotally, it seems like people are able to get back into some of these platforms like Facebook, like Instagram as well, which is very important, especially on this big Super Tuesday where you're going to have a lot of candidates trying to use these social media tools to try to get people out to go vote. But nonetheless, it seems like these issues are largely resolved, at least as of right now, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Brian Chung, for clearing that up, at least for now. And next, we're joined by a Biden campaign co-chair on how they are trying to ramp up enthusiasm for the incumbent president. Stay with us.
Whether I agree or disagree completely with what he may have done or may do in his office, he brings us a sense of calmness to the whole process.
In 2020, Biden or
Biden.
And 24?
I want neither. I'm going to vote for Biden.
Talk to me about why.
It's kind of the lesser of two evils, in my opinion. Not that I would rather vote for either of them.
And right now, that's California, Sacramento, California, where voters are casting their ballots at the California Museum on this Super Tuesday. Governor Gavin Newsom is expected to join them this hour and cast his ballot. As voters are heading to the polls, immigration has emerged as a key issue in the 2024 campaign. Despite pressuring House Republicans to kill a bipartisan Senate border deal, former President Trump has been slamming the president on the issue, calling the influx of migrants at the southern border an invasion, and using it to stoke fears among voters with really tough language like this during an interview last night at Mar-a-Lago.
They're coming from places unknown, and they're rough people, in many cases from jails, prisons, from mental institutions, insane asylums. You know, insane asylum, that's Silence of the Lambs stuff. Hannibal Lecter. Anybody know Hannibal Lecter? We don't want them in this country.
Joining us now is Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, a candidate for the U.S. Senate from Delaware in 2024, and also national co-chair for the Biden for President campaign. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Thank you very much. So what do you make of the language that Donald Trump is using on the border issue in particular?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Andrea. And, you know, it's interesting, as I was watching him speak, I remembered back to the beginning of my first term in Congress. I came in 2016 at the same time as the former president. And it is so clear to me the contrast between this president and President Joe Biden. I mean, just the rhetoric, the way he talks, the division that he stokes has created this toxic environment where even when you have a president as strong as Joe Biden, who has pulled people around the table to actually work on the issue of immigration and make sure that we have, you know, the protections that we need, you have former President Trump out there already trying to stop the deals. And really, you have to ask yourself why. I mean, it's really politics, and that's really one of the biggest differences between the two. One is about self-preservation, and one is about lifting up and caring about the American people and focusing on our economy, our safety, our fundamental freedoms and rights, and doing it in a way that's compassionate and that actually gets stuff done. So as I listened to his remarks, I don't know, for a lot of people out there, they might have had that same flutter that I had in my heart. Like, we can't have more of that. We can't go back to that. We need to be moving forward.
Well, what do you make of the New York Times Siena College poll asking registered voters if the election were held today in a head-to-head, whom would they vote for? 48% said Donald Trump. 43% said Joe Biden. That matched a recent NBC News poll. So,
yes.
How can Joe Biden turn this around? The economy is getting better. People don't seem to be feeling it, although they're beginning to feel it, consumer confidence rising. But what can he do to overcome this, this deficit in the polls?
You know, as a co-chair of the campaign, we take this race seriously. The president knows that this is going to be a tough race. And so we go into it with that lens. But we also know that Joe Biden has been able to accomplish things and that people are starting to see it and starting to feel it. Again, the contrast of someone who has talked about infrastructure, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris with the House and Senate Democrats who have actually passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill that has helped our roads, our bridges, given people access to broadband, our veterans being able to get benefits through the PAC Act, seniors being able to have their insulin prices capped at $35. And so for us, our message is get the message out there, let people see, feel, hear what we've done, but also recognize that it's still a tough time. We are coming out of a historic pandemic. I will say that to us, the biggest indicator is not necessarily the polls, but what people do in the voting booths at the polls. And this last, as you've seen, the past few early primaries, President Biden has shined 90%. 86% when you look at places like South Carolina, even in New Hampshire where he wasn't on the ballot, he got 60%. And so we look at what the voters are saying. We want there to be this sense of urgency. And I even look at who's contributing to this campaign. We've had historic grassroots support from teachers, retirees, you name it, in addition to a new campaign headquarters where it is filled with young, as well as some seasoned people like me, young, energetic folks across the country that are working on this campaign. So we're excited, but we want people to have that sense of urgency to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
But then, of course, you look at Michigan, and I think you would admit that no Democrat is going to win the presidency without Michigan. It is critical. More than 100,000 Michigan Democratic primary voters casting ballots for uncommitted to protest the Biden administration's support for Israel in the war with Hamas, the continued arming of Israel, as much as they now are trying really with these, airdrops to get some meals in. It's not nearly what is needed with hundreds of truckloads that need to get in, and that Israel is resisting, opening more border crossings. And so despite the Hamas massacre that, of course, started this war, there's no question that there is widespread among the Democratic base and other people, independent voters, real concerns about the Biden policy on the Middle East.
Yes, well, first of all, I want to lift up Vice President Harris's speech yesterday, this recent speech where she called for the immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages, as well as dealing with this humanitarian crisis as it is. We look at Michiganders and say, we're proud that folks are exercising their democratic right. They have a voice, and we want them to use it, unlike even in my own state of Delaware, where we just had Supreme Court rulings that are trying to limit people's access to voting. For us, we want to make sure, again, that we work for every single vote. This president, every day, every night, is working to ensure that we have a peaceful solution, a two-state solution, and that we stop the violence and the bloodshed that we're seeing. And so we are sure that Michiganders will look at the results of what this president has done as we get toward Election Day and see a clear choice between someone who is caring and uplifting the American people as opposed to someone who is really focused on himself.
Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, thank you very much. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And the strategy session on this Super Tuesday, special edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports, we'll take a closer look at the Haley campaign and a make-or-break moment for the candidate.
I need you to vote, and I need you to take 10 people with you. You tell them that in a general election, we're given a choice. In a primary, we make our choice.
And on this Super Tuesday, a live look at a polling place in Denver, Colorado, where many people vote by mail, but they do have the option to cast their ballot in person. Nikki Haley has repeatedly said she is not ready to drop out, but that has not put a stop to speculation about what she will do after all the votes are cast today. Will she stay in the race? Will she endorse Donald Trump? She did cast doubt on that in an interview with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press on Sunday, despite having promised the RNC she would support whoever is nominated in order to get on the debate stage last fall. Republican strategist Susan Del Percio has some suggestions for Haley. She joins me now. Also with us, former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Donna, thanks for being with us. Susan, as well. So, Susan, what do you think Haley's path should be if she does not do well tonight?
It all depends on her donors. I would like to see her make it to the convention, but I don't know how much her donors will back her to continue to allow her to kind of spread the word, if you will. She should absolutely not consider a independent candidacy, whether I know she said no to no labels, but they may really look to get her in. She should say no to that. I think her best bet is really to run, maybe even with Liz Cheney, you never know, but really run a anti-Trump campaign. She doesn't have to go pro-Biden necessarily, but really go and talk about the dangers of Donald Trump, because he is a danger to this country. If he's elected president, we know what he's going to do because he tells us. He will be, act like a dictator for more than one day. He will start religious bans. He will do all of that, and Nikki Haley has a voice.
And Donna, the war in Gaza is going to be part of the President's State of the Union address. Some of the American hostage families are going to be in the chamber. NBC News is also reporting that the president is going to paint a sharp contrast with Donald Trump on Ukraine, health care costs, tax breaks for the wealthy. Talk about what is at stake in a very big speech.
Well, look, I think for the president, it's going to be an opportunity to speak to the nation and to talk about the accomplishments of his administration, but also to highlight a vision for the future. And that will be a stark contrast to the likely Republican nominee, Donald Trump. And I think this is an important moment for the president. Also, to begin to shore up his base, the base that won him his election. And I think that speaking out in very clear terms and stark terms about his policy regarding the Israel-Hamas war and the support for humanitarian aid, and more affirmatively, I think will help to bridge some of those divides that have taken place over these last several weeks and months. But this is an important speech for the president, and it is his opportunity to capture the nation and to lay out his vision for the future.
And Susan, Donald Trump is golfing at his West Palm Beach golf club today. He's not doing any media side. He was on Fox earlier today. Is there any indication that one or more of the legal cases facing him, like the immunity issue before the Supreme Court, could hurt him going forward? It seems as though every legal challenge that he's faced, negative as it might appear to be, and certainly in the pocketbook, given the fines that he's facing, has only improved his fundraising and his ability to garner more support.
You're absolutely right, Andrea. The only thing that we'll start seeing if it takes a wear and tear on him is the trial in New York. And I understand that most people say it's, the lesser of all the charges and trials he's going to have to face. But having to be in court every day as a criminal defendant against felonies is jarring, and he's still supposed to campaign. So that's happening March 25th. That's when the trial starts as of now. And we'll see what kind of toll that takes on him.
Susan Del Percio, Donna Edwards, thanks to both of you. We'll all be watching tonight as the returns come in and the big picture. Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker, joins me next for a look at the candidates ahead of what promises to be a consequential night. Donald Trump certainly has an overwhelming control over the Republican Party, cementing that certainly today and in the next couple of races to come. But among his legal challenges, he still faces federal election interference charges for his role involving January 6th. That prompted Kristen Welker's questioning on Sunday when she compared his response to the insurrection to what the Senate Republican leader said at the time.
Yes or no? Is he practically and morally responsible, as Mitch McConnell
We're going to
says?
find out.
But do you think he is? What do you think? You're running
I think
for
he should
president.
have said something earlier. I think he should have stopped it when it started.
Is that
I
a
think
yes?
He should have. It's what I'm saying. I am telling you, having the rally was not a crime. To turn around and not stop people from breaking the law when he had the opportunity to do that is questionable. And that's what I think the courts are going to have to play with.
And joining me now is Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker. Kristen, that was such a great interview. And you pressed her also on whether she would be, if she does drop out, if he does get the nomination nailed, whether she would be endorsing him because she made that promise to get on the debate stage that she would support whoever's the Republican nominee. And she wouldn't say that. It's the first time she's indicated hesitance about that. What is your best guess, best informed guess about what she might do, whether she would endorse Donald Trump if she does end her campaign in the next, tonight or in the next couple of weeks?
Well, Andrea, and thank you for that. It was a striking moment because she was among the Republican candidates who signed on to the RNC pledge that they would support the eventual nominee, and she backed away from that pledge for the very first time. So she really opened the door to the fact that she might not endorse him, Andrea, and we have all seen her really step up her attacks against him. And look, she has really cast this as a fight for the Republican Party. The fact that, as she argues, Donald Trump is an isolationist. The fact that his language, as she argues, you can't bring your kids to his rallies, and so on and so forth. And, of course, January 6th as well, which you just heard her talking about there. What's notable is, what does that say about a potential third party run? She ruled that out with me on Sunday. I know you were just talking about that. If she doesn't endorse him, what signal would that send to some of her supporters who might be contemplating supporting Donald Trump? About half of them that may show some flexibility because, of course, she gets a lot of independents. She even gets some Democrats, Andrea, in these primaries. But it is a significant question. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens tonight, whether she has a strong showing tonight and how much longer she stays in this race, Andrea.
And another question on the Democratic side is that President Biden does face some uncommitted possible votes today for his support for Israel, his unwavering support, really, in terms of the arming of Israel, even though he's been more critical, and certainly the vice president has, of Israel and their handling of not the ceasefire negotiations and also not getting more aid crossings in. Nearly half the Super Tuesday states have uncommitted or a write-in option after that strong protest vote in Michigan of 100,000 votes. Do you think there is the possibility of that as well today?
It'll be, I think, notable to see how high the margin gets. We know that that uncommitted vote went to about 13% in Michigan, and 2 delegates are going to the convention. So it sent a strong signal, I think, to President Biden, to the White House, to the administration, that they have to take these concerns quite seriously. It's potentially enough to tip a state that could be as close as Michigan is expected to be in this election. So we'll have to see what the margins say, Andrea. If you get into the double digits, if you get up into the 20 and 30%, that's a 5-alarm fire, I think, for the president. But just taking a step back, they know that this is a big issue. It's an issue that could cost them in the Muslim and Arab communities. It's an issue that could cost them with younger voters. That is why the campaign has dispatched top aides to try to reach out to these communities. That is why you see the administration really trying to toughen their tone as it relates to sending a message to Israel that they need to mitigate civilian deaths. So we will have to see how it plays out tonight. It'll be another data point about how serious this could be in November.
And what are you seeing in terms of the campaign and how seriously they're taking some of these polls, the New York Times poll, our poll, 5-point differential in a head-to-head, even at this stage, 8 months out, is not great for the incumbent. And his, favorability, ratings are so low, as well as people still not beginning to give him credit for the economy. Consumer confidence beginning to inch up, but it still doesn't feel right to people, even though the economy is markedly better and the strongest recovery, globally is right here in the U.S.
Well, Andrea, what I have found, based on my conversations, is there is a huge divide between Democratic allies outside of the White House and the campaign and those who are inside. When you talk to those outside of the campaign, they want the campaign to show more urgency. Their argument is the general election has begun. Trump has started his general election, even though he has not yet clinched the nomination. But if you talk to aides who are close to the president, they say, look, the starting gun goes off on Thursday night. That's when President Biden is going to make his most forceful case yet for why he believes he deserves another 4 years in office. He's going to cast this as a choice. Whose side are you on? He is going to argue. And then you're going to see a sprint to the finish. You're going to see him, his top aides, cabinet members, surrogates out on the campaign trail. So I do think they would argue there is an urgency, and we're going to see that really get underway on Thursday, Andrea.
Well, Kristen Welker, you've got a long day and a long night ahead of you. Thanks for taking time for us. You can catch Kristen, of course, throughout the night, streaming on NBC News Now, beginning at 5 Eastern and later on NBC, where all that coverage starts at 10 Eastern. And that does it for this edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. Remember, follow the show on social media at Mitchell Reports. Make sure to tune in at 6 Eastern as Rachel Maddow, Steve Kornacki, our MSNBC team bring you all of tonight's results. And Chris Jansing Report starts after a short break.
Good day, I'm Chris Jansing, live at MSNBC headquarters in New York City. Today, the big reveal. Millions of voters across 16 states with some of the wildest, most competitive and expensive races a Super Tuesday has ever seen. And since it's by far the biggest day on the primary calendar, it can tell us the direction both parties are heading in and how they'll stack up this November. Consider the scores of down-ballot races, microcosms of a country at war with itself over its priorities and its politics. The premier matchup in California, where leading the volatile U.S. Senate race polls, moderate Adam Schiff against the liberal Democrat Katie Porter and Republican ex-ball player Steve Garvey, who has surged in the polls, even while barely campaigning. In North Carolina, MAGA voters could elevate a Trump-endorsed culture warrior in the fight for governor in one of the country's few true battleground states. Texas voters ground zero for what is increasingly the top campaign issue in the country, what to do about the border. And across the country, 115 congressional primaries are being decided as we speak, with Democrats needing to flip just 4 seats to take control of the House. All of that providing valuable exit polling data, informing campaign strategies with extraordinary stakes that include the future of reproductive rights, immigration, voting rights, criminal justice, and, of course, the overarching stake, the future of democracy. We have 2 hours to provide insights into all of that with an extraordinary show of force. Our correspondents fanned out all across the country and talking to voters in 13 states today. So a lot to get to, and it brings us to the top of the ticket, the presidential primaries. It's clear that both President Biden and Donald Trump are beyond anxious to get to what will be an epic rematch fully underway. Both are so close to clinching their party's nominations. Well, get ready. 2024 is likely to be the longest general campaign in U.S. history.
Well, my focus is really at this point, it's on Biden. We should win almost every state today. I think every state. We're going to have a unified party because our real opponent happens to be named Biden.
There's so much at stake: democracy, freedom, economic opportunity. If you haven't voted yet in the primary season, go to iwillvote.com to find out where you can vote. But think of the alternative, folks. If we lose this election, you're going to be back with Donald Trump.
NBC's Ali Vitale is following the Haley campaign from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Okay, this is the one name on the ballot that is not Trump or Biden. And everyone wants an answer to this question. What is Haley expecting today? And maybe more so, what is she going to do after today?
Look, I think I can answer one of those questions for you, Chris, which is that Haley is expecting to do as well as she can here in this. And I know that that's vague, But the campaign has purposefully been vague when I have asked them repeatedly, what does success look like? Where on this map do they think they can notch a win? Of course, they finally got their first and what could be their only win on Sunday night in the Washington, D.C. primary. Now, though, they're looking ahead to Super Tuesday, and it's going to be a question of coalition building. You look at places, for example, like in Virginia or in Vermont, places that Haley has spent a little bit of time in this ramp up to Super Tuesday. That's where they think they can cobble together a coalition like what we saw her do in New Hampshire, where it's not just your traditional Republican primary voter, but maybe it's folks who want an alternative to Trump, maybe it's independents, maybe it's even Democrats who can play in this primary before ultimately going home to the Biden campaign in November. But when I talk to voters in a state that's more ruby red, a place like Texas, this is what those Republican voters who showed up to Haley's last event last night had to say to me. Watch. So what happens in 2024 if it's Trump versus Biden?
Are we on camera? Biden, probably.
For you?
I've been voting since I was 18, you know. I'm a strict Republican, but I'm not going for Trump.
Well, I would stick with the Republican Party, definitely.
Even if it's Trump?
Yes.
And so, look, Chris, that's the split that I hear at Haley campaign events. I would say 2-1. They say they're either going to stay home and vote for or vote for Biden, or they're going to go home to Trump. I mean, it's really a split bag at this point. But for Haley, that's the point. The idea that in her being the nominee, it could take some of the electability guesswork out of the Republican Party's game in November. Of course, as we have said before, and we need to say again, you don't get to a general election without getting through a primary. And that is, of course, the Haley campaign's difficulty at this juncture. I will also add for you, Chris, I just spoke with a Haley campaign official just in the last few minutes. They're calling themselves today a bunch of happy warriors. They say, at least here in the Mount Pleasant and Charleston areas, they are listening to music, some of it a little bit on the nose, including the Drake song Started from the Bottom. Of course, now they are here, and we'll see where they go next at this point.
All right, Ali Vitale out on the campaign trail. Thank you so much, as she always is. Let's go to the big board. NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki is with us. Steve, we know Nikki Haley would like to stay in this race. That said, what is she up against tonight?
Yeah, she's up against some pretty harsh realities of delegate math, of state rules about who can vote and how those delegates are distributed. But let's start with, if Nikki Haley is going to make some noise tonight, where would it be? Where would we look? So the first polls to close, actually, there's two states here that could be quite friendly to her. One is Vermont. It's actually basically a winner-take-all state. If you get the majority of the vote in Vermont, you get all 17 delegates. Vermont was not a good state for Donald Trump in the 2016 Republican primaries. Here you're taking a look at the results here. Trump only got 32.5% in Vermont, barely beat John Kasich. This was one of Trump's worst showings in 2016. There's no party registration in Vermont. Independents, Democrats, if you think of yourself as one of those, you can vote in this Republican primary. So right away, that could be a target for Nikki Haley. Also closing at 7 o'clock tonight, take a look in Virginia. And again, you look at the 2016 results in Virginia. Trump won this state, but that was an underwhelming performance for Donald Trump relative to what we saw in other states. The particular area of trouble for Donald Trump in Virginia, you're going to see it in this very population-dense Washington, D.C. suburbs of Northern Virginia. They do give out some delegates in Virginia that are based on the congressional district result. There's 3 delegates right in that Northern Virginia, D.C. area, 3 districts there where I think Haley could certainly win and could collect some delegates tonight. And we'll see if she's able to make the statewide race in Virginia a competitive one. Some other places you might look tonight for Nikki Haley would be Minnesota, would be Colorado. The delegates, though, are given out there basically on a proportional basis. So whether she actually technically wins the state or loses the state, it's not going to alter the delegate math too much, although psychologically, if she could win either one of those, that would be a big coup for her campaign. The problem for her, though, is even if she has success, some kind of success in the states I just outlined, she's looking at California. This is a closed primary. No independents. No Democrats. It's a winner-take-all primary. 50% plus 1 take all the delegates. There's 169. Can Donald Trump get a simple majority in a closed primary? All the evidence suggests he can. Texas, 161 delegates. Again, very conservative electorate, very Trump-friendly demographics. The rules that make this not quite, but close to a winner-take-all state. That's more than 300 delegates between those states. And unless Haley's pulling a rabbit out of the hat, Trump is getting the overwhelming share of those 300-plus delegates. Arkansas, Alabama, Oklahoma, Tennessee, very favorable demographics to Donald Trump, rules in terms of how those delegates are allocated that effectively make a lot of those states winner-take-all or close to winner-take-all states. So just by winning in the states I've outlined here for Donald Trump, he stands to get a massive, massive delegate haul. And by getting some of the delegates in Colorado, some in Minnesota, some in Virginia, some in Vermont, that's not going to get Haley very far just in terms of the math. And again, unless she is winning multiple states tonight, outright winning multiple states where nothing we've seen in the primary results and nothing we've seen in the polling so far suggests she has much of a chance. Unless she does that, this Trump number is going to get very high, maybe close to 1,000, and this Haley number will go up, but not by a ton.
That would be one of the greatest political upsets if she wins any of those states. Steve Kornacki, who will almost certainly still be at the big board this time tomorrow, we thank you for all of that. Much appreciated. Okay, so let's talk about the two prohibitive favorites. NBC's Garrett Haake is with the former president outside Mar-a-Lago, and NBC's Aaron Gilchrist is covering President Biden. Garrett, listening to the former president recently, it seems like Trump can hardly wait to dispatch with Nikki Haley. So what's the rush, and what does the campaign hope to get out of tonight? I don't know, maybe some voters he's struggled with in other states. What's their goal, just to end it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, even though she's not winning states, every time Nikki Haley's on a ballot and she gets 20, 30, 40% of the vote, she exposes a vulnerability that Donald Trump has within the Republican electorate and within the general election electorate at large. And the Trump campaign would like to shut that down as much as possible so they can, to the degree it's possible with the candidate that they have, pivot towards the general election and try to focus more on Joe Biden and less on this, intramural Republican fight. So they'd like to try to put this away. They understand that they cannot win the nomination outright mathematically tonight, but with a big enough sweep, they hope that perhaps they can push Nikki Haley closer to the exits. All of that said, the former president continues to kind of not be able to quit Nikki Haley. He cannot quite keep his focus on Joe Biden even when he wants to. He spends at least some portion of every media appearance or campaign appearance making sure to attack her. And even when he suggests that she's not winning, not doing that well, he's giving her more oxygen to stay in this fight.
All right, so Aaron, Joe Biden doesn't have a Nikki Haley. He isn't facing any real competition in these states. But can today's results, or tonight's, I guess, is more accurate, tell the campaign some things heading into the general?
Yeah, I think so. You have the Super Tuesday voting that's happening today, combined with the State of the Union speech the president will give on Thursday. And this is really a point in time where I think the campaign is looking to really ramp up its efforts to get the general election process underway. We are going to hear President Biden in his State of the Union address on Thursday talk about what he believes his successes have been so far in his administration, and then also talk about what he wants to do in the future. And you combine that with the reality around what the president has been saying about the former president, Donald Trump, in the last few weeks, and what he believes is the threat that he poses to democracy. Those are messages that you're going to hear continuously as the general election campaign gets closer. The Biden campaign is, by all indications, is looking at today as one more big round of voting that will further solidify who the competitor for President Biden is going to be going forward. I also think, Chris, that we're going to see in the next several days more talk about where President Biden is going to be going and what he'll be talking about in terms of his outreach to voters. We know that this weekend he'll be heading to Philadelphia on Friday after the State of the Union, and then to Georgia, to the Atlanta area on Saturday. We also just learned that former President Trump is going to be in Georgia on Saturday as well. And so we'll again have this split screen moment as we did in Texas last week. But this time it will be squarely campaign focused for both candidates. And the reality around what the general election is going to look like, I think, will come into sharper focus, Chris.
Yeah, as he heads to two of the handful of battleground states. So look, Garrett, as I've been listening to Donald Trump, and even just yesterday, he's been pretty dismissive, actually, of Nikki Haley, even suggesting that he lost D.C. on purpose. But do you get any sense that the political realities, and don't mistake anything about Donald Trump, he's done pretty well using his own political gut, could those realities make him inclined to pursue what a Fox News host called a peace deal with Nikki Haley? Would he find her support useful, do you think?
I think ultimately that's something that the Trump campaign is going to want. Whether Donald Trump wants it or not is another story, Chris, because, you know, he takes politics quite personally a lot of the time here. And if Nikki Haley doesn't come back to him with an apology and sort of, you know, coming back on his terms, he may not personally want her support. But his campaign is sophisticated enough to understand that they do have a significant problem with women, with suburban voters, with independent voters, like those that Nikki Haley appeals to. So whether it comes in the form of an endorsement from Nikki Haley or of a rapprochement between those two politicians or some other effort to shore up his support with those demographics, if Donald Trump wants to be president again, they're going to have to address that issue more completely, because right now, what he's been saying on the stump is basically, if you're not with me now, I don't want you back later. And that is not a recipe for winning in a general election that's going to be decided by maybe 100,000, 200,000 votes in 6 states.
That is wild, Garrett Haig. Even though I know it, you say it, and it's crazy. Thank you, Garrett. Aaron Gilchrist,
Really
thank you as well. All right, we've got a lot more to cover here. Can Haley's campaign give some clues for how to beat Trump? And what does it mean that she is the last Republican standing? We're back in 60 seconds. Does today's potential last stand for Nikki Haley tell us mostly about the enduring power of Donald Trump? An NPR analysis shows Haley and her supporters far outspent the competition, about $100 million of the $300 million spent overall by 8 candidates. But with the exception of D.C., where only about 2,000 votes were cast total, Haley has lost every primary by double digits. Still, she's clearly frustrated by detractors.
I don't know why everybody's so adamant that they have to follow Trump's lead to get me out of this race.
And then there's the unanimous Supreme Court ruling that allows Trump to stay on the ballot. As the Washington Post succinctly puts it, to anyone hoping that Trump's efforts to overturn the last election would lead the judicial system to meaningfully penalize him before the next one, recent developments have proved sobering. So, are there any lessons from the Republican primary that can help Joe Biden's campaign build a plan to beat Donald Trump? Joining me now, former White House Communications Director, former Communications Director for Hillary for America, MSNBC political analyst and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Jennifer Palmieri, former chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 campaign, and senior MSNBC political analyst, Matthew Dowd. Jennifer, nothing Nikki Haley's campaign has done so far has put her in the winners column, D.C. accepted. She just keeps losing. I wonder, is patience a virtue here? Is she wasting her time? Do you have a different thought, particularly based on your experience as someone who knows what it is to be on a campaign up against Donald Trump?
Yeah, she's never going to become the Republican nominee, but as long as she stays in, she's helping Joe Biden. You know, if you look at what happened in the Republican primary, I mean, I think Biden comes out in pretty good shape. You know, we learned, I think, New Hampshire, there was going to be some kind of energy behind an effort to have an anti-Biden movement. It should reveal itself in New Hampshire, where Biden wasn't on the ballot. There was no energy. There's no traction for that. So Biden comes out of the primary in a good position. And then for Trump, it's just this fundamental problem for him that somewhere between 20 to 40% of Republican voters are voting for somebody else. Now, I don't know what's in Nikki Haley's head, but I'm glad she's there. She's making an argument. I think it's really helpful to Biden and to the anti-Trump effort overall for Republican voters to hear criticisms of Trump from a fellow Republican. And I think that helps Biden a lot with independent voters going into the general election.
So let me challenge you just a tiny bit, because you mentioned New Hampshire, but what about Michigan and 100,000 people who decided they were not going to vote for Donald Trump in a race that, as Garrett just pointed out, could be decided in very low 6 figures?
Yeah, but they voted uncommitted, right? They didn't vote for Dean Phillips.
Isn't not voting for Joe Biden, if they're generally in the Democratic camp, the same as a vote in the general for Donald Trump?
they made a decision not to do that, right? Why did they do that? They made a decision to call their group Listen to Michigan. I know that Matt's actually from Michigan, so I will, we will, we'll hear from him about this. But I think, listen to Michigan. And then you saw they got 100,000 votes. It's percentage-wise, it's the same uncommitted vote that Donald Trump got. I mean, excuse me, oh my gosh, that happened when Barack Obama ran in 2012. I'm turning into Trump, thinking that Barack Obama is still in office. Anyway, it's a bigger number because it's a higher, it's 100,000 voters. Some of those voters, I know that I know people in Michigan think some of those voters will not come back for Biden, and that the Democrats will have to find different paths to victory. Some of them will, right? And I think the vice president's remarks on Sunday in Selma helped a bit. Partly these are people who lost actual family members in the Gaza conflict that really want to hear concern, anger, emotion from the president and vice president, and they heard that. Obviously, you've got 8 months to figure, for developments to happen in Michigan. I mean, developments to happen in Gaza will impact Michigan, but they're having to prepare for other alternatives for how you win that state. But I think overall, Chris, like the polls show so much. There's so much discussion about people don't want Biden to run, that even Democrats didn't want him to run. If Biden was really weak, and I'm thinking about, can he turn out the vote in November? A challenger would have emerged in this process, and it just didn't happen. People are having his back in a way that suggests that's not going anywhere. There is the Gaza, that is an issue. That is a real issue. I'm not dismissive of that, but overall, he comes out of this with the party united behind him. I think it was helpful to go through that February 8th special counsel report where everybody sort of freaked out about coming to terms with the fact that he is 81. I feel like a lot of Democrats have come to terms, and we're just in it to fight for him. And he comes out of this process unscathed, which is not easy in the Democratic primary process.
We shall see. It is early. You're right about that. We have a long time until the election. Matthew, Nikki Haley did pull a good percentage of votes in several states, including nearly 27% in Michigan, which is a battleground state. Our reporters are out talking to voters today, and this is what Republican voters in Massachusetts and North Carolina said about her.
I think she's the best chance we have right now to lead the country, and I wanted to make sure that I put out a vote against Donald Trump.
I like the fact that she's younger. I like the fact that she has executive experience as a governor. She also has some foreign policy experience.
I think she's a great candidate. She's smart and energetic. I think her speaking is upbeat.
November's a long time away. But what's your sense and your experience tell you, Matthew, about how many of those voters might be available to Joe Biden? And is it potentially enough to be decisive?
I'll answer the second question first. No, it's not enough to be decisive in this election. I think very few. I mean, one of the things I keep saying is there's no data right now that says Republicans who don't like Donald Trump are going to vote for Joe Biden in a general election. I mean, you take a look at every single poll, 90% of Republicans in the general election say right now they're going to vote for Donald Trump, and 90% of Democrats, to answer a previous question to Jennifer, say they're going to vote for Joe Biden. So all of these sort of ideas that there's these misgivings among partisans and that somehow they're going to move over and vote for the other guy, there's just no evidence in a general election that's going to happen. I would also add, in 2016, there was this same conversation. A bunch of Republicans are dissatisfied. They're going to vote against Donald Trump. And then in 2020, they're even more dissatisfied. They're going to vote against Donald Trump. Donald Trump got 94% of Republicans in 2020 in the general election against Joe Biden. That's more than Ronald Reagan. That's more than George W. Bush. That's more than John McCain. That's more than Mitt Romney. That's more than any other Republican in the last 30 years has gotten of the percentage of the base. So I think it's a fun thing to look at as we look in the primaries. But if I were the Joe Biden campaign, I would pretty much say 90 to 95% of any Republican, no matter what they say during the primaries, is going to vote for Donald Trump.
Jennifer and Matthew, you're both going to stick around. We have a lot more to talk about. Coming up next, we're going to head to Texas, where the battle over the border is a big motivator for Super Tuesday voters today, what it could mean for candidates up and down the ballot. Then later, new details about that deadly and explosive warehouse fire in Michigan that left at least one person dead. You're watching Chris Jansing Reports, only on MSNBC. The border battle makes its way into the voting booth today because while polls show it's a top issue across the country, it looms particularly large in Texas, the border state that politicians love to visit, and a state that's picking a Democrat to take on Senator Ted Cruz. No Democrat has won a Senate race there since 1988. It's also where a longtime well-known incumbent is facing a rare Democratic opponent. NBC's Priscilla Thompson is reporting in Dallas. Back with us is Matthew Dowd. Priscilla, a lot of interesting stuff going on where you are. How contentious could these down-ballot races be in the state today?
Yeah, Chris, it's going to be interesting. As it relates to this Senate race, you have got 9 Democrats vying for an opportunity to take on Senator Ted Cruz. And important to note that if none of them get a majority today, that race is going to advance to a runoff. So while Ted Cruz will focus his attention on a general election, the Democrats may have 2 more months of duking it out for who is going to be up against him in November. And we caught up with the man who is leading the pack in terms of the Democrats right now, Congressman Colin Allred, and we asked him about the big issue that is animating this race, and that, of course, is immigration. And he said that he has not shied away from criticizing his party and the Biden administration on that issue, pushing them that the status quo is not going to be enough. There needs to be more urgency around it, and he feels like the administration is moving in that direction, though notably when I asked him if he would campaign with President Biden if he came to the state, listen to that exchange. Do you plan to campaign with Biden here?
Listen, anybody's welcome to come, but my message will stay the same, which is that I'm focused on Texas.
And so if Biden plans to come, will you join him?
I don't know if he is, but listen, like I said, whoever comes, whether it's Trump, Biden, anybody else, you will not hear anything different from me, which is that I'm focused on Texas and I'm focused on how I know Ted Cruz is not representing us.
So not a no, but not a yes. And you see him sort of smiling. He did not answer that last question that I posed to him. But that is really telling of where this race is right now and where it's going, because at the end of the day, the people at the top of the ballot in November are going to matter, and that is likely going to be President Biden facing off against former President Donald Trump. And we know from polling that there are a lot of voters out there who feel like Republicans handle the issue of immigration better. And so you see there Allred really trying to carve out his own path on this issue, saying that I am from Texas, I know these issues very intimately, and sort of the message that he is trying to put forward on the issue of immigration and the idea that more needs to be done. Chris?
Priscilla, thank you. Well, Matthew, I'll say this about Colin Allred. He knows the state he's running in. He knows it's a state that hasn't elected a Democrat to statewide office in 30 years. This is a Senate seat that Democrats think they can flip. Can they?
Well, I'll give a little caveat. I worked on that campaign. To give you my age, I worked on that campaign in 1988 that the Democrat won, Lloyd Bentsen won. And I also was the campaign manager for the last Democrat to win statewide in 1994 in this race. So I have some familiarity with it, how it's changed in all of that. I think Colin Allred is going to lead coming out of tonight. The question is does he lead by enough? Does he get 50%? I think he'll get close in that, but I think in the end he'll be the Democratic nominee. Beto O'Rourke showed that Ted Cruz is vulnerable in this race when he ran against him in 2018. I think Colin Allred is exactly right to run in this race on the border and not run away from it like many Democrats have done, to take it on proactively. And one thing, if I were advising him to do, is basically run straight at Ted Cruz on this border, on the border, and say, you've been a senator for 12 years. Texas has had a border for 150 years, and it's been a problem for the last few years. Why haven't you done anything? Why haven't you done absolutely nothing? You've done absolutely nothing on this. So I think they have a shot But I think at this point in time, it's an outside shot. I think it's a much better shot in a midterm than it is in a presidential year, because Joe Biden will be on the top of the ticket and likely lose Texas. But I think he's got a shot.
I'm being told to wrap, but I have to ask you this question. If it ends up that he has to run against Roland Gutierrez, likely, does he skip that, and does he just go after Cruz starting tomorrow?
Yes. I mean, that's what I would advise him to do. Go straight after Cruz, just ignore the primary, because Democrats are going to get motivated by who can take on Cruz the most. So even the best message in a runoff is running against Cruz. So I would just start my general election campaign tomorrow.
Matthew Dowd, who isn't even being paid for this advice, giving it for free. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. And all of your experience in Texas. Coming up, Donald Trump's new legal strategy to fight the gag order in the New York hush money case. Plus, how the former president's constellation of legal dramas are motivating some voters at the polls today.
Former President Donald Trump is obviously facing some legal issues right now, 91 felony counts. What do you make... Why are you laughing, sir?
Well, 91 felony counts. What does that tell you? Okay, keep going.
In the hours leading up to Super Tuesday, Donald Trump filed a new motion opposing the gag order in the New York hush money case. His lawyers argue President Trump's political opponents have and will continue to attack him based on this case. The voters have the right to listen to President Trump's unfettered responses to those attacks, not just one side of that debate. So, how big an impact could this ruling and future potential gag orders have on the presidential race? I want to bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard from Mar-a-Lago. So it is hard to restrain, Vaughn, let's just put it simply, what Donald Trump has to say on and off the campaign trail. Do voters you're talking to feel like he's been unable to share his side, that he's being shut down? What are you hearing?
Right. There is animosity towards every one of the prosecutors who have taken on these independent cases against Donald Trump. Animosity from those who have been most loyal to him among his millions of supporters around the country, feeling like this is a direct effort to undercut the Republican Party as a whole, and the ability for the Republican Party to effectuate change in Washington, D.C. as the voters would like to see. When it comes to whether Donald Trump, though, is actually being silenced, look, there's nobody that is keeping him off of the campaign stage. This is a matter of campaign resources at this point, but to an extent of that, there is also ire that so much money from the affiliated super PACs have had to be spent on legal bills stemming from this. I want to let you listen to two individuals that talked to our embed colleague Alex Tabbitt outside of a polling location in the Super Tuesday state of Utah today on the impact of these criminal trials on their votes today. Take a listen.
Why would Michael Cohen go to jail in the Stormy Daniels case and then Donald Trump would have no accountability, and yet he's the guy that footed the bill? So, like, of course he brought that on himself, right?
I think it's unfair, and I feel like if I didn't vote for Trump, I feel like I would be saying that's okay. I guess that's what I'd say.
What do you mean by that when you say that's okay?
It'd be okay. Using the justice system to attack your political opponent.
And Chris, as we move past this GOP primary with Donald Trump expected to secure this nomination within the next week or two, for him, these criminal trials are only going to be more at the forefront of his political campaign, because for the last year, it's not like Republicans used it as a bludgeon against him politically, any of the indictments against him, and that is where you see the exact opposite from Democrats in the Biden campaign, who have every intent over the next 9 months to remind voters about what's at stake and what's inside of those indictments that have led to these trials.
Vaughn Hilliard, good to see you, my friend. Thank you. Well, 1 month after his wife's conviction, jury selection is underway right now for James Crumbley. He's the Michigan father facing involuntary manslaughter charges tied to his son's mass shooting at Oxford High School in Michigan, murdering 4 of his classmates 2 years ago. Jennifer Crumbley was the first parent ever convicted for a school shooting carried out by their child. And her testimony then will be felt here. She repeatedly claimed her husband was responsible for the safety and storage of the gun used in the shooting. Explosions lit up Michigan skies overnight when a warehouse storing combustible materials caught fire in Clinton Township, a northern suburb of Detroit. Officials say a 19-year-old about a quarter mile away was struck and killed by debris. NBC's Adrian Broaddus joins us now from Clinton Township. What's the latest we know there?
Well, Chris, through much of the morning and now entering into the afternoon, firefighters have been working behind us trying to cool those hot spots after this massive fire, which could be seen at least 5 miles away. I want to take you through the timeline of what happened. First of all, the fire chief telling us this was a vape shop, and inside they had at least 100,000 vape pens with lithium batteries. Just before 9 o'clock last night, the first call came in reporting explosions. Soon after, that big fire. Now, this fire lasted for hours, as so did the explosions. What caused it is unclear, but the fire chief says the people who were inside were able to escape. A 19-year-old, according to investigators, who was about a quarter and a mile and a half away, was hit in the head by some of that flying debris. Much of the debris, canisters containing butane and nitrous gas, went flying into the air, landing up to a mile away. Meanwhile, investigators are trying to determine what caused this and who, if anyone, is responsible. Chris?
Adrian, thank you so much for that update. Voters casting their ballots right now in Denver. Up next, the key data expected from exit polls, what two of our campaign experts will be watching for. More of our Super Tuesday coverage to come with Chris Jansing reports on MSNBC. Today's races are about more than just delegate totals. Exit polling will give Democrats and Republicans a chance to look under the hood, so to speak, and get real-time data on how the voters see the frontrunners and what they want from them come fall. For example, in 2016, a vast majority of Super Tuesday Republican voters said they were angry with the government. Trump dominated those who wanted a change and rode that wave to victory in November. In 2020, Joe Biden won 10 Super Tuesday states with support from moderates and black voters, key groups that also helped him win the White House later that year. Matthew Dowd and Jennifer Palmieri are back with me. Okay, Jennifer, let me start with you. What question or questions do you think will be most important to get the answers to in exit polling tonight for Joe Biden?
What I was interested prior to last week with the Supreme Court decision was whether or not you would vote for Donald Trump if he was convicted. Not that he would ever be convicted necessarily, but it gives the Biden campaign information about how, that is critical information for the Biden campaign. It's like, all right, Trump may not be convicted, but they know. That tells you some critical things about that person, about the unease with January 6th, perhaps unease with classified documents, that they can be, and they may not be Republicans, per se. They could just be independents that are voting in the Republican primaries. So I think any information that gets at, the Haley voters are the most interesting to me. What's behind their concerns? Is there anything in there that the Biden campaign can mine to think, is anywhere, some percentage, some small percentage, 5%, 10%, whatever, of those people open to voting for Biden. Who did you vote for in the last election is a very key question, too, because that'll tell you if there's new people turning out, or if, it may be that a lot of people that are voting for Haley actually voted for Biden in 2020. They may be disgruntled former Republicans that came over and voted as independents for Biden, but it's her voters I find the most interesting.
Let me ask you about the Republican side, if I can, Matthew. And I think both the inclination and the reality for folks around Trump is let's let Trump be Trump. I don't know that exit polling is going to inform what his messaging is on the campaign, but certainly it can help his campaign with ads and things and then down ballot. So what are you going to be looking for?
Yeah, every time anybody says like, oh, what should the strategy be? Let Trump be Trump. It's like, do you go to Zeus and say, let Zeus be Zeus? Because that's what he thinks he is. So Donald Trump is never going to be anything but himself, no matter if it hurts him or even when it helps him. It doesn't matter. He's going to be who he is. To me, the most interesting thing, which we've seen develop, and I'm going to look at it tonight, is how out of sync even though they vote for Donald Trump overwhelmingly, how out of sync Republican views in the primary are with who's going to decide the election in the general election. And so when you look at those Republican primary voters, they're all backing Trump. They don't want to fund Ukraine. They don't want the U.S. to be active in the world. And they're opposed to Roe versus Wade and want some national abortion ban in the course of this. All three of those issues, while supported in the Republican primary, are overwhelmingly unpopular in a general election. And you can't find the same thing dynamic among Biden primary voters. In almost all cases, Biden primary voters are right along in sync primarily with where the general election is. And so to me, the most interesting thing is how the Republican Party, and we'll see it tonight, we'll see if we see it tonight, continues to be, even though they are going to vote for Donald Trump and all of that, how way out of sync they are with the average swing or independent voter, a majority in the general election.
So how do you use that? And I'm thinking particularly, because let's not kid ourselves, not only is the House, control of the House at stake, so is control of the Senate. They're both obviously so incredibly tight right now. How do you message if you're a Republican in a swing state, a swing district?
Well, if you're a non-Donald Trump candidate, it's going to be very hard because he uses up all the oxygen in the room. You have to try to, and even though they don't do this, which I never understand, they refuse to separate themselves from Donald Trump. They keep going along, I guess because they're afraid of his primary voters in a primary. But what we learned, let's say, for example, in the Michigan vote in 2022, is all three Democrats won overwhelmingly against Trump-backed candidates. All the Trump-backed candidates continued to just lay themselves on the line for Donald Trump, and they lost badly. And so if you're a Republican candidate, even though I think most of them don't have the courage to do this, in order to win in a swing state, which is where this will be fought for the House and the Senate and governor's races, is you have to separate yourself from Donald Trump, because among those swing voters, he's toxic.
Matthew Dowd, Jen Palmieri, this is, for us, this is as fun as it gets. Don't forget. Well, okay, I'll just speak for myself. I see a little pain on both of you.
There may be a few things like the Lions winning the Super Bowl that are more fun for me, but this is up there.
Well, there is nothing more fun for me than the Browns winning the Super Bowl, but let's just say I haven't had much luck with that so far. Don't forget to catch Jen's MSNBC podcast, How to Win 2024. She has co-host Claire McCaskill, two of my favorite people. Scan the QR code on your screen. There it is on the lower right, and follow along and listen. Coming up next, will it be the Michigan protest vote all over again in Minnesota for President Biden today? Plus, hanging over this Super Tuesday, that ubiquitous sense of dissatisfaction about the choices for president.
I'm so sick of baby boomer presidents. Like, I love Joe Biden, and I think he's done a great job, but I do worry with his age. But, you know, given the alternative, Trump or Biden, there's 0% chance I'm ever voting for Trump. Like, it's either have democracy and a guy that's too old to run it, or democracy ends. Those are your choices.